Chapter 703. It was as if they had practiced it countless times. After the clone was killed by Nazul's curse, the three new dukes used Bigby's grappling palm, Bigby's diamond fist, and Bigby's crushing palm on Nazul. In the eyes of the onlookers, Nazul was beaten up by a monk, a new profession that had yet to appear in the Eastern Kingdom. A palm strike caused Nazul to lose his center of gravity, and Gavin Rad sent him flying with a hammer. Then, Duke number 2 followed up with a grappling hold and grabbed him again. Then, he used his fist, which was as big as a water tank and had a high concentration of magic power, to add a heavy blow at close range. Finally, he used the stance of the rising dragon fist to hit Nazul's chin. A series of actions were completed in the time it takes for a spark to fly off a flint. When Nazul was sent flying, everyone was shocked to discover that Duke's doppelganger's rising dragon palm had sent Nazul right towards the giant hammer that was descending from the sky. Ultimate holy verdict. Bang! It was an earth-shattering sound. Even through clothes, skin and muscles, everyone could clearly see that Theon's holy light had completely penetrated Nazul's body, from the top of his head to the soles of his feet. Whoa! Nazul did not even scream. He opened his hideous mouth full of fangs, but not a single word came out. It was done. Everyone knew the importance of magic circuits to a spell-type professional. After encountering the Orc Warlock for the first time in the first year of the Dark Portal, the Dalajan mages waited impatiently for a long time before they successfully obtained an Orc Warlock's corpse. After dissecting it, they concluded that Orc Warlocks, like humans and elves, all had magic circuits. Since the structure was the same, then Theon's holy light penetrated Nazul's body and killed his chance of survival. What would happen to a mage's magic circuit when holy light, which did not belong to the natural elemental domain, wantonly rushed into it? The consequence was a state of being unable to cast spells, even more serious than silence. No one knew how many magic circuits Nazul had, but it was obvious that the circuits with the spine as the central axis had all collapsed under the impact of the ultra-high purity of the holy light. Perhaps there would be other smaller magic circuits. The main circuit had definitely collapsed. Gavin Rad swung his hammer again. This was not an ordinary holy light attack, but a fatal strike with the power of lightning. Yes, strike while he's down. After hanging out with Duque for so long, Gavin Rad had become a little corrupted. At this moment, the tusk ornaments on Nazul's waist suddenly shattered. A few black shadows suddenly jumped out and shot towards the two paladins and the two rangers. Group Death Coil. Death Coil could be said to be a warlock's life-saving move. As long as one was hit, not only would they lose control of their body due to fear and fall into a state of paralysis, the powerful dark energy could also forcibly convert 20% of the damage into the warlock's vitality. This was not just one shot, but 4 shots of Death Coil. Most importantly, an inanimate object would not be able to trigger Death Coil. It was conceivable that if the vitality of all 4 heroes was absorbed at the same time, Nazul would definitely recover in an instant. At this critical moment, the movements of the 4 guys were surprisingly consistent. Their empty left hands directly fled to their waist pouches and threw a white fluffy thing towards the death coil that looked like a black skull. Squeak! The small animals screamed at the same time, causing Nazul's face to turn pale. All that was left was despair. Death Coil had indeed hit, but unfortunately, it had hit the little white mouse that had been prepared in advance. The pitiful scapegoat turned into a dried rat as soon as his legs touched the ground, and he fell from the sky. Nazul's heart was the same as these little guys, falling from mid-air into the abyss of despair. Even this was predicted? Unwilling. 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 Nazul had never thought that a good time to trample on the field would turn into him stepping into his grave like an idiot. What's going on? Did Nefarian not have good intentions from the start to send me to my death? How did he know that I would definitely not be able to defeat the people of Karazhan? Or did he predict the existence of the Red Dragon Queen? I don't understand. I don't understand. So what if I don't understand? Too late. Too late. I won't give him a chance to turn the tables. The incomparably powerful wild arrow had arrived. They perfectly bypassed the 2 paladins beside Nazul and hit where they wanted to hit. Like a target that had been nailed to a target, Nazul was hit by more than 30 arrows in the blink of an eye. His whole body was nailed to the solid granite ground by a steel arrow that was more than half a meter long. This was not the end. The 2 paladins directly hammered down. Bang! 2 dull hammered down at the same time, making a sound as if it had been a single hit. After a short period of paralysis, Nazul clearly felt that his right shoulder and right lung had completely collapsed. As for the abdomen that was hit by the heavy hammer, there was a hole on the left side of his waist. His intestines were squeezed out of the wound as if they were escaping. No! The blood and lung debris that came out of his lungs quickly filled Nazul's throat. He could not even say half a word. However, a mystic did not necessarily need words to activate magic. In his mind that had not completely collapsed, Nazul said a few words. The dark portal. Save me. An accident that Xueqi absolutely did not want to see happened. The last sound that came out of Nazul's heart turned into a distant cry. It was not a cry of a human, a cry that was not a living thing. It was a cry at the level of the soul. However, it caused a reaction from the dark portal in the faraway cursed land. Rustle. 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 In the cursed land, every orc that was camped along the south side of the dark portal ran out of their tents in horror because they felt the vibration from the dark portal. The chiefs looked at the pillars on both sides of the dark portal in astonishment. The huge statue of the mage holding the sword was actually trembling slightly. On the ground, the red gravel rose and fell like waves. Everything seemed to be foreboding something. All of a sudden, the door of darkness in the cursed land closed, and the tribe that was trapped there lost all the support from Draenor in an instant. The orcs cried out in shock. The one who could not accept this fact was Xueqi. He opened his red eyes wide and watched as a huge all-like unknown object pierced the sky above the platform. A deep spatial passage that looked like a black hole opened in an instant. The dark portal responded to Nazul's call and was using its incomparably brutal power to try to pull Nazul back from the space of Karazhan. Chapter 704. It was never easy to open a stable portal in a complicated place filled with all kinds of spatial rifts. The door of darkness had done it with its boundless and unparalleled might. Amidst the strange sound of glass breaking, the scene of the void was divided into countless pieces, constantly tumbling. Mortals who could not see the mystery of space were completely confused at this moment. For example, Gavin Rad saw that one of his hands was growing on his thigh. Everyone was shocked, except Xueqi. Stand down! Xueqi's shout made everyone find their backbone again. The invincible effect caused by the holy light could resist the turbulence of space? Stop kidding. Holy Shield could block the damage of the space fragments, so it would not be called Holy Shield, but Cosmic Invincibility. A pair of mages' hands pulled the shoulder armor of the two paladins back. Immediately, the two paladins took advantage of the force, kicked their legs at the same time, and directly dodged the space fragments that were just a few centimeters away. Ha ha ha! Nazul coughed up blood while laughing wildly. He was afraid of death, so how could he not have a backup plan? The dark portal was his backup plan. That's right, the dark portal itself was a dead thing, and it did not have its own will. However, when Nazul attached the soul fragments he collected when killing his enemies to the dark portal, even if they were thousands of miles away, he could still control the dark portal to perform the same action as the warlock's summoning ritual. The only thing that Nazul miscalculated was the attack power of Xueqi and the fact that he could not summon demons. Nazul laughed wildly, but his heart was cold after surviving a disaster. The strong of the alliance was really not something that the tribe could deal with. At this moment, Nazul's body had begun to become illusory. It seemed that in 3 seconds, he would be able to complete the teleportation. At this time, the light of Flash suddenly lit up in front of Nazul. Replacing the two paladins who flew back was Xueqi's figure in a blue and white mage's robe. If Xueqi looked like a mage now, then Xueqi was definitely a melee mage. Under the scanning of the system elf, he saw every piece of space fragment that was spinning in the void. Then, like a spear, he suddenly lunged forward in a horse stance, thrusting out the Tita-Hark step of time in his hand. The trident-shaped black spearhead pierced into Nazul's illusory abdomen without any hindrance. Then it opened fire. Originally, the hundreds of arcane missiles that poured out from Xueqi's magic staff could not hit Nazul. Strictly speaking, Nazul's body had begun to disappear from this dimension. If it were any other mage, they would not be able to do anything about it. Not Antonidas. Not an Astrian. Perhaps the Mediv of the past could do it, but unfortunately, the Mediv had already become the dust of history, at least for the time being. Nazul was unlucky. He had encountered the even more bizarre Xueqi. Xueqi did not have the destructive power to destroy the world, nor did he have the supreme magic power of ultra-high purity. But in terms of control and precision, Xueqi was definitely the best in the world. The dark portal was just a dead object. It would only instinctively follow the instructions of the soul fragment and teleport creatures in the specified space dimension. The basis of teleportation was to set the coordinates of the starting point and destination. If either one was messed up, then it was likely to be teleported to the void or a spatial crack. Xueqi could not stop the teleportation of such a high-level divine object like the dark portal, but it did not mean that Xueqi could not do anything about it. What he did was to control Karazhan and slightly change the coordinates of the surrounding space dimension. Yes, if you want to teleport 10086, then I give you 9527, then you will definitely be in a mess. To completely teleport a person away, it seemed to be an instant, but in fact, it had to scan the entire body at least 100 times every second. Otherwise, if there was any error, even if the teleportation was successful, it would be a pile of meat paste. What Xueqi destroyed was this process. It looked like an arcane missile attack, but in fact, each shot contained a chaotic space coordinate. He was interfering with the judgment of the dark portal. Ah! What did you do? No, no, no. Nazul screamed, but he could not stop the dark portal from stopping the teleportation process for his safety. Under the surprised gaze of everyone, the turbulence in space stopped, and Nazul's body quickly solidified from an illusory state. No, no, no! The dark portal, you idiot! Teleport me away! Nazul was still calling out to the dark portal through the soul fragment. However, in a place like Karazhan, where space was unstable, teleportation was not so easy. According to the feedback from the system, it seemed that at the dark portal in Draenor, the warlock that Nazul had left behind was hurriedly performing a second summoning ritual in an attempt to pull Nazul back. However, under the control of Xueqi, Nazul could only be like a fish out of water, struggling futilely on the cold floor. Now, because of the collapse of the Master's will, the two huge nightmare creatures that Nazul had summoned had been dealt with by the Virgin Mary and the Curator. Everyone began to gather around to see how Xueqi would deal with the third chief of the tribe. Xueqi snapped his fingers, and an illusory mirror image appeared beside everyone. It was a magic message. The big shots of the Alliance who had been nervously waiting for the outcome of the decisive battle in Karazhan in the Overwatch Fortress, the Reed Ridge Mountain Fortress, the Dalajan, the capital of Lordaeron, and the palaces of the various kingdoms, all breathed a sigh of relief when they saw Nazul twitching on the ground like a dying old dog. Ha ha ha! We won! I knew Xueqi could do it! Anduin Lothar was the first to raise his fists high. Good job, Xueqi! In the Reed Ridge Mountain, King Lang jumped up. Damn it, my old face! In the Dalajan, King Antonidas touched his red face. Xueqi again! In Lordaeron, Terenas had mixed feelings. The reactions of the kings were slightly different. However, in the Overwatch Fortress at the front line against the Horde, the entire Alliance army suddenly burst into thunderous cheers. Long live Saint Duke Marcus! Ha 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 ha! Another great chief! I knew that Lord Marcus would not let us down. Xueqi's holy name had become sacred, and was once again praised by countless soldiers. Facing the Horde again, even the bravest soldiers could not help but feel uneasy. However, when the two sides were confronting each other, there was suddenly news that Xueqi had defeated the chief of the Horde. This news undoubtedly strengthened every Alliance warrior's confidence in the Alliance's victory. Chapter 705. On the other hand, the Horde was doomed to wail. In order to destroy the Beastman's morale, the Alliance cleverly broadcasted the magic image to the Horde. In the Cursed Lands, the morale of the main force of the Horde was low because they could not attack and were trapped in the Cursed Lands. Now that their path of retreat was suddenly cut off, coupled with the news that their chief had been defeated, panic spread through the entire camp. No! This must be the Alliance's scheme. The Alliance made a fake image to fool us. The former shamans, who were now orc warlocks, ran around to boost the morale of the Horde. Unfortunately, there was almost no effect. The main force of the Horde this time was made up of Kilrog Deadeye's Bloodring clan and Kargath Bladefist's Shattering Palm clan. These two clans that returned from the battlefield could be said to be the strongest in the Horde in terms of combat power. Even the Thunder God, Thunderblade, Mocking Skull, Crimson Walker and Chomping Bone clans could not be compared to these two clans. Whether it was the quality of individual soldiers or group battles, they were far inferior. Just as the Thunder God clans tried to find a sense of security from the Bloodring and Shattering Palm clans, they discovered that the beast men of these clans were even worse off than them. The warmongers of the Shattering Palm clan lowered their heads, not saying a word. The elite warriors of the Bloodring clan knelt on the ground and cried, "Ancestor! It's that demon again! Duke Marcus, it's not enough that you killed the Black Hand chief and defeated the Orgrim chief. Do you still want to kill our third chief? It's over. It's over. We can't defeat that Duke." The Thunder God and Thunderblade clans could only reign supreme after the publicly acknowledged strongest clans were gone. After all, it had only been 2 years. Most of them had not forgotten the glory of the Blackrock and Warsong clans. Now, through word of mouth, they knew that Duke Marcus was the super demon who wiped out the Blackrock clan, chased the Warsong clan into a ravine, and killed and captured 2 chiefs. Looking at the dead dog like Nazul in the huge mirror, the morale of the orcs completely collapsed. The news of the orcs falling into chaos quickly spread to the watchtower. This is a good chance. Let us defeat the horde in one go. Let our lightning tank legion take the lead. Muradin Bronzebeard danced with excitement. The little man could not wait to recreate the glory of the Scorching Gorge. Sure. Taking advantage of the chaos to kill the enemy was a judgment that every qualified commander must have. Anduin made the decision on the spot. Wait. He couldn't use all of them. The dark portal is a little dangerous, Duque called out to Lothar through the magic transmission. Danger? But fighter jets. Duque, give me a convincing reason. The opportunity was fleeting, and Anduin could not let go of such a great opportunity. So what if the Door of Darkness was restored? As long as they could heavily injure the elites of the tribe who were trapped here, they would definitely be able to deal a blow to the tribe's morale. Duque thought for a moment and gave a plausible reason. Zul can remotely control the dark portal, and I have yet to remove his soul control. The mana contained in the Gate of Darkness is too powerful. I'm afraid that it'll be dangerous. You can't use everything you have. After that, it seemed that the magic communication was interrupted by some kind of spatial interference, and the communication was cut off. What happened? Muradin asked. It's not a big deal. Karazhan is located above an unstable crack in space, and it's common for magic communication to fail. In the past, it was very difficult for us to Mediv, and we often had to send people directly to them. In the past, when it was the worst, Karazhan had to seal the tower directly because of the fluctuations in space. It's not unusual for us to be unable to contact Karazhan for a year or 2. Anduin was telling the truth. Since he was the commander-in-chief, they didn't ask any further. However, when they were ready to attack, there was a disagreement. When everyone saw Anduin put on his helmet and looked like he was going to fight, they were indignant. Please, Sir Lothar, you're the commander. It's not the Battle of the Scorching Canyon now, and the front and center formations have collapsed. Why do we need the commander to go directly? The old General Hoss smiled and stopped Lothar. Turalian also advised seriously, if we need the commander to go personally to defeat the enemies of chaos, wouldn't it seem that we generals are too incompetent? Yes. Commander, you have enough meritorious service. Let us young people get some credit. Ha 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 ha. Muradin, the damned dwarf, also joined in. Anduin's face darkened. Muradin, come out. The others can call themselves young, but Muradin, you old bastard, you're almost 100 years old, and you still have the nerve to act young in front of me. Among the dwarves, Muradin was just a young man, and he did not have the slightest self-awareness of an elder. Remembering that he was a great-grandfather among the humans, he immediately shrunk his head. Okay, I admit my mistake. Seeing that everyone was not going to let him go, Anduin had no choice but to comply. Turalian, lead 1,000 cavalry to flank the east, and Hoss, lead the Eagle Knights to flank the west. Both sides are probing attacks. If the orcs are not panicking, then don't rush. Muradin, cover the fire. Turalian and Hoss saluted at the same time. Yes, sir. Only Muradin was extremely depressed. His dream of charging the tanks was temporarily ruined. In various places, the Alliance launched a counterattack. In the Red Ridge Mountains, Reginald led Duque's private troops out of the fortress and launched an attack on the Black Tooth clan. The Black Hand brothers were killed until they cried for their parents. Tirisful Woodlands. Briar. While Wuther and Grom were fighting fiercely, Mograine led the army to launch a counterattack, vowing to destroy the entire Warsong clan here. It was conceivable that in a short time, News of victory would come from all fronts. No one would have thought that Xueqi would encounter such a huge problem. It was true that Xueqi and the others had beaten Azul like a dog, but when they were dealing with him, something strange happened. No, I don't want to die. I don't want to die. Don't come over. The great chief of the third generation was actually so afraid of death that he was inferior to a little orc girl. At this moment, even the two paladins, Gavinrad and Theon, had a look of disdain. The joy of defeating such a great chief was incomparable to Lothar killing the Black Hand and Turalian taking down Orgrim. I don't want to die. I don't want to die. Zul struggled to get his injured body as far away from the great devil Xueqi as possible. Xueqi sneered. We won't kill you. We will only imprison you. No! I don't believe you, you devil who murdered millions of orcs. Chapter 706. Puff. Xueqi was speechless when the Warlock King, who used demonic powers, said that he was a demon. Just as Xueqi was about to do something, Nazul's words made Xueqi's heart almost jump out of his chest. No! I don't want to die. Kill Jaden. Save me. For a moment, darkness enveloped the entire space. A gloomy voice echoed around Xueqi and the others. Save you? Of course I will, in the way of the Burning Legion. Kill Jaden sneered. Demon Commander? Alexstrasza couldn't help it this time. She strode out and stood beside Xueqi. Come out. Scum of the Burning Legion, let us have a good fight. On the other side, Xueqi gritted his teeth. He wasn't sure. In the original history, Nazul was the last to seek death, and was teleported to an unknown void before he was caught by Kill Jaden. Why did this evil god come out now? Kill Jaden spoke again. Fight? Ha ha ha. I don't have time to care about you, little Azeroth lizard. However, since my poor contestant is chanting my holy name, wouldn't I be letting down my title of Deceiver if I don't do anything? Heh. Deceiver? Yes. Demon Lord Kill Jaden was a member of the highest class in Eredar. His evil was as chilling as his power. His status was like Sargera's 25,000 years ago. The most powerful warrior of the Titan race was selected by the Titans. Like Archimonde, he was one of Sargera's left and right hands. Kill Jaden enslaved the Dreadlord race and their king, Tichondrius, and made them swear to follow him, secretly take care of all kinds of matters for him, and assimilate any other potential race into the Burning Legion. Every world that was invaded by the Legion was left with only flames and ashes. The Legion led by Archimonde was invincible, and its scale and destructive power were unparalleled. All of this was inseparable from Kill Jaden's wisdom and strategy. He was a disguise master that left a deep impression on people. He used all kinds of different appearances to get in touch with every race he wanted to conquer. Let's not talk about the faraway ones. Right in front of him was the Dreeny Eye, who he had transformed into Azul's wife and tricked the orcs into attacking the remnants of the Prophet Velan who had betrayed the entire Eredar race. In the game, Xueqi only felt that Archimonde the Defiler and Kill Jaden the Trickster were big bosses that were difficult to defeat. But in reality, even a transmigrator like Xueqi couldn't help but be amazed by the trickster's ever-changing tricks. Kill Jaden rarely mentioned his own name, but when he did, Xueqi shuddered. System Elf. Scan all the surrounding data. I want to capture any fluctuations. Understood, host. After scanning for less than a third of a second, Xueqi finally knew what Kill Jaden's trump card was: Gul'dan's Skull. Under a thick layer of shielding spells, Gul'dan's Skull was reacting in a way that no one could understand other than Xueqi. At this moment, Xueqi finally understood why a mere demigod like Gul'dan's Skull could become a god-level magic weapon. This damned skull contained the power of the fallen titan, Sargeras. Right now, an earth-shattering explosion was brewing inside the skull. This was no different from using Sargeras's corpse to play Corpse Explosion. Xueqi couldn't imagine how powerful this explosion would be. Looking at the power data determined by the system, Xueqi was willing to bet that apart from Alexstrasza, no one here would survive. Even if Xueqi activated the entire Karazhan defense system, it wouldn't be able to withstand it. F***CK. Sona Zul had attacked Karazhan to deliver a nuclear bomb. I've been tricked. Time seemed to freeze. Everything around him seemed to slow down countless times in that instant. Tyrion Fordring's face was filled with nervousness. His arms holding the two-handed warhammer swelled up until the armors creaked. Gavin Rad stood in front of Duke and took out an epic-ranked shield from his storage space. He also changed his hammer to a one-handed hammer. The Windrunner sisters pulled their bowstrings and stood back to back, approaching Duque with small steps. Aurelia's lively eyes moved quickly, as if she wanted to kill Jaden hiding in the void. Sasha glanced worriedly at Duque from time to time. Only Alexstrasza had her hands on her hips, proudly looking around with a domineering gaze. As long as the commander of the Burning Legion dared to come out, she would immediately beat him up. Apart from Duque, no one knew that Kill Jaden would not appear at all. At this moment, Duque thought of countless ways, but it was not that simple. They were like unlucky people who had swallowed poisonous grass. Even the venom had seeped into their blood vessels. It was not something that could be spat out just by washing their stomachs. At this critical moment, Duque suddenly glanced at Nazul, who looked like he was dead. Several fangs were emitting a faint red soul glow. Yes, I got it. Didn't the dark portal want to save Nazul? If you want it, I'll give it to you. In the blink of an eye, dozens of Duque's doppelgangers appeared. They made various movements. This time, not only did they disturb their own people, but even Kill Jaden, who was peeping at Duque and the others through Nazul's soul, was confused. Only one of Duke's doppelgangers rushed to Nazul's side and kicked Nazul, who was still holding the skull of Gul'dan in his hand. The doppelganger kicked Nazul's stomach. Ah! The third great chieftain screamed, and his whole body flew up. In the next moment, the void behind him suddenly opened, and a dark portal with a ferocious snake-shaped sculpture on the door beam appeared in front of everyone. Duque? The queen was very surprised. Wasn't Karazhan's dimension controlled by Duque? Duque did not answer. He let the dark portal swallow Nazul, who was like a dead dog. He even let one of his doppelgangers stand in front of Alexstrasza. Impossible. In the void, Kill Jaden's cry of surprise finally came. The enemy's fear, I'm glad. Even though everyone still did not understand what had happened, for Kill Jaden to be so frightened, it could only mean that Duque had made the right choice. Go back! Duque's main body grabbed one of the Windrunner sisters' arms with his left and right hands, and directly dragged the two sisters back. At the same time, he used Flash. Something that could make Duque scream so heartbreakingly must be very serious. After less than a tenth of a second, it was the more agile sisters who used Flash to drag Duque into the gate of Karazhan. The queen followed with the two holy knights. Almost at the moment when the door to the balcony was closed, an unparalleled loud roar came. Chapter 707. Karazhan was a magical place. This extraordinary wizard tower built on a spatial crack had the ability to protect space that most wizard towers in the world did not have because of the geographical advantage. Aurelia had personally tried shooting arrows into the open door from outside the platform. The door was obviously empty, but the arrows would naturally bounce off when they hit the door. This was because the inner layer of the door and the platform seemed to be connected, but in fact they were not the same space. Even in Karazhan, the moment the door closed, it still felt a huge shock from space. The vibration of the spatial laws destroyed most of the balcony in an instant. In Duque's mind, there was a three-dimensional model of the situation in Karazhan. In the display, Duque clearly saw that a granite boulder weighing more than 10 tons was picked up by an invisible supergiant and floated in the air. It did not crack, nor did it shatter. Instead, it was directly swallowed by the void. There was no terrifying shockwave like a big explosion, but a large area of space collapsed as if it was swallowed by a black hole. Teleport. For most wizards, teleporting when space was unstable was courting death. However, under the system's calculations, Duque grasped the only stable millisecond and directly teleported himself and his companions to the highest floor of the wizard tower. Even the Red Dragon Queen couldn't help but take a few more glances at Duque at such exquisite control. Even Aurelia, who was used to seeing big scenes, paled a little. Explosion. What happened? Can you withstand it? Duque gritted his teeth. It's okay, at most 1/3 of Karazhan will collapse. Duque's face was darker than the bottom of a pot. If he had not kicked Nazul back into the dark portal, it would have been the entire Karazhan that had been blown up. That bastard killed Jaden. What AF * king scheme? Gul'dan's skull was a super-nuclear bomb. Usually, it could provide almost endless dark power, and it could also be detonated at a critical moment. In the original history, It was this thing that worked together with the dark portal that blew up the entire Draenor into pieces. Now, it was being used as a nuclear bomb to blow up Karazhan. Xueqi could imagine what would happen after Karazhan, an important part of the Azeroth dimensional barrier, was destroyed. The dimensional barrier of this planet was also a huge magic circle created by the Titans of Creation. Within the formation, the dragon aspect and the dragon race's power would be greatly amplified. If Karazhan, one of the spatial nodes, was destroyed, it would undoubtedly affect the entire magic circle. Of course, for the Burning Legion, it would be even better if they could kill one of the dragon aspects, Alexstrasza, in one go. That bastard killed Jaden. He actually predicted that I would ask Alexstrasza for help. Xueqi was trembling all over. He had been tricked. Without a doubt. This was the first time Xueqi had been fooled since he entered the world of Azeroth. Xueqi, who had been successful in every endeavor because he grasped the trend of history, finally suffered a small setback under the sneak attack of Kill Jaden, one of the final bosses of the Burning Legion. It wasn't that Xueqi hadn't thought of this possibility. Unfortunately, as he changed the history of the world more and more, many things were beyond his control and budget. This was the best proof of that. Originally, Kill Jaden would only appear to take away Azul's soul after he was defeated. He didn't know if it was because Xueqi had crippled Kazak in one go and slapped the faces of Kill Jaden's 2 female adjutants, causing the 2 coquettish bitches to go and complain about him. In the end, it directly led to Kill Jaden personally making a plan. It seems that we've been tricked. Alexstrasza sighed. Yes. Xueqi's face turned green. The queen patted Xueqi on the shoulder. Don't blame yourself too much. You've already done very well. Even I didn't react just now. If I had taken that explosion head-on, I'm afraid I would have been seriously injured even if I didn't die. When the queen said this, the people around her all felt a lingering fear. Think about it, this kind of big explosion that could be felt across several dimensions. How could a mortal's small body withstand it? The queen continued. For you to be able to do this at such a young age is already a miracle. There's no need to insist on miracles among miracles, understand? Xueqi's clenched fists finally relaxed. Understood. Speaking of which, what's going on outside? Sasha asked weakly. Xueqi quickly let the system check, and the results disappointed him. Sorry, the spatial turbulence is too serious. We have temporarily lost contact with the outside world. However, this explosion came from the dark portal on the other side of Draenor. It was like this when we were just connected. I'm afraid over there. Planet Draenor was probably going to explode just like in history. Xueqi's guess was right. It was precisely because Azul had placed the summoning ritual at the dark portal on the other side of Draenor. So when the skull of Gul'dan exploded, the first thing to explode was the dark portal on the other side. The orcs who were entrenched near the dark portal on Azul's orders fell into the deepest despair. Most of them didn't even react to the sudden explosion. In that instant, the originally calm dark portal suddenly had an extremely intense reaction. The black light it produced devoured all other colors in the world, making them unable to see anything. They could only vaguely hear the sharp howls of the wargs and the exclamations of their companions, but none of the orcs knew what was happening. That terrifying sound was quickly replaced by a rumbling sound. Just before they could realize what was happening, a deafening collision sound was heard. The orcs could not control their bodies and fell hard to the ground. The unlucky ones lost consciousness in an instant. For the powerhouses who still retained their consciousness, perhaps this was the real cruelty. As they struggled to breathe in pain, they suddenly found that the darkness had dissipated. When they immediately looked in the direction of the dark portal, it was already gone. The giant sculpture that guarded the dark portal had become a pile of stones that did not look the slightest bit similar. The 3 huge pillars that formed the frame of the portal, the 3 pillars that had witnessed the glory and greatness of the tribe, had also turned into rubble. There were no signs of Azeroth here. In the next moment, the entire world seemed to be screaming in the flames. The raging flames spread even further with the wind. Most of the land collapsed, and the huge impact crushed the entire land into broken waves that stacked up layer by layer. Every beastman next to the dark door was engulfed by that world-shaking explosion. Chapter 708. Nazul. The call was full of mockery. It woke up the strongest orc warlock, the great chief of the tribe. Ah! The moment he regained consciousness, Nazul screamed like a little girl who had been bullied. Of course. His screams were very unpleasant to hear. At the same time, all of his senses were filled with a strange feeling of nothingness. It was the feeling of his entire body floating in the weightless void. Nazul squeezed his eyes shut, hoping to dispel the feeling that was enough to make him crazy. However, it was of no use. The howl from the depths of his soul kept eroding his consciousness. In the hypnotic repetition of the single sound, he once again heard the voice that made him extremely uncomfortable. Nazul! He widened his eyes and looked around. Not far away, in the strange whirlpool of light and shadow, he saw something. It was the existence that imprisoned him here. Nazul! The call of his name once again resounded in this dark space of nothingness. Nazul felt that there was a bigger and darker shadow shrouding him. He looked up and saw the true face of the shadow that terrified him. It was a huge creature wearing blood-red armor. This creature's facial features were very similar to the Draenei that Nazul had ordered to be slaughtered, but his face was bright red. There were 2 short curved horns on his tall temples, and he had a beard on his chin. 2 tentacle-like things protruded from the bottom of his mouth. A few earrings shone, and his eyes flashed with a deep yellow light. Almost through the connection of their souls, Nazul immediately knew the identity of this mysterious existence. Yes, it was Jaden who had tricked his soul through a blood contract. In theory, this was the master that he had to serve for eternity. My lord! Nazul gasped. Although his limbs were still imprisoned, he tried his best to bow to the other party. Ah! Nazul, my little servant who is not pious enough. Jaden, the demon commander of the Burning Legion, replied with a grin. Do you think that I have forgotten about you? No, my lord, of course not. In fact, Nazul did hope that Jaden would let him go like a fart, and then completely forget about him. Unfortunately, that didn't seem to be the case. You useless fellow. You ignored my orders and gave up on leading the orcs to attack Azeroth. He couldn't even bring a bomb into Karazhan. If it wasn't for your cowardly, summoning ritual, Azeroth would have one less annoying dragon aspect. You've disappointed me, and you've made me pay an unnecessary price. Do you know that? The demon commander laughed, and his ear-piercing voice sent chills down one's spine. No, master, I can make up for everything. Nazul hurriedly changed his words. No, I've lost my patience with you. Now, it's time for you to pay for your failure. No, 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 no. The void echoed with Nazul's screams. Pieces of flesh and blood were torn from Nazul's body. The souls of the dead surrounded him and dug into his soul with their claws. Flesh and blood splattered everywhere, hovering in the air not far away. In the next moment, the flesh and blood returned to Nazul's body, making his body as good as before. Then it was torn apart again, and the cycle started again. Along with the cruel torture, Jaden's laughter continued to echo, and his huge demonic body also trembled with the laughter. That terrifying and strange laughter was enough to make Nazul's soul and will collapse. This was just the beginning of the nightmare. In Karazhan, Xueqi sighed. He didn't need to think to know that Nazul must have knelt down and become Jaden's toy, just like in history. Then, it wouldn't be long before Jaden, who was tired of playing, coerced Nazul's helpless soul, and gave him one last chance to serve the Burning Legion. Otherwise, he would have to endure eternal torture. The weak Nazul would once again accept the conditions set by the demon. His soul would be placed into a carefully carved block of ice. This block of ice, collected from the distant distorted void, was as hard as a diamond. The first Lich King was born. However, Xueqi couldn't care less about these things for the time being. There were too many things to do in front of him. 1/3 of Karazhan had been destroyed, and everything near the ruler's terrace had been destroyed. Even the surrounding stairs had been affected. Well, there were really broken stairs. The entire Karazhan Mage Tower was covered with shocking cracks, as if it had experienced a terrible earthquake. No, this was worse than an earthquake. Because an earthquake would not cause the spatial passage of Karazhan back to Azeroth to collapse. Now, there was no way out, and the spatial defense that had been set up before had almost completely collapsed. Now, a large number of void creatures rushed out of the spatial cracks, simultaneously attacking the main gate of Karazhan and the door of the library. Ha ha ha! An abandoned mage tower. Kill the guards. Rob him. Countless humanoid creatures wrapped in bandages, with their cores shining with mysterious radiance and illusory energy, charged into Karazhan. These creatures, which were 2 people tall, were called ethereals. They were a group of ethereal thieves that wandered the various voids, constantly looking for valuable items. Kill these invaders. Theon rode his Einherjar warhorse and took the lead, smashing down with his hammer. Beside him was Gavin Rad, and behind him were hundreds of translucent Einherjar warriors. Khadgar floated in the air, casting fire magic. Huge fireballs were thrown out one after another, hitting these fellows who valued money more than their lives, exploding into sparks. At the main entrance, Alexstrasza was guarding the gate, and no one could get through. With a flap of her illusory dragon wings, one of the void creatures that was rushing over screamed in pain and flew out of the main gate for nearly 1,000 meters before stabilizing itself. However, it immediately discovered that there was a mysterious flame spreading uncontrollably on its body, burning even in the void. It tried hard to extinguish the flames, but in the end, it was burned to ashes in front of its companions. It took a full 2 hours to destroy no less than 5 groups of enemies. Only then did those void creatures with a little bit of intelligence realize that this strange and mysterious building that suddenly floated into the void was not a pushover. Only then did they leave resentfully or watch from afar. Everyone returned to the top floor of the Mage Tower and gathered around Xueqi. "How is it?" Theon asked. "Very bad. In a sense, because of the Big Bang, Karazhan was separated from planet Azeroth." Xueqi rubbed between his eyebrows. "Ugh." Everyone's face darkened. Chapter 709. Can we go back? Tyrion asked. "I don't know." Because of the big explosion, the spatial passage that was originally connected to Azeroth collapsed. Karazhan can't go back the way we came, and to make matters worse, we've lost the spatial coordinates of Azeroth. We seem to be floating in the universe in the form of a spatial interlayer. This was the biggest headache for Xueqi. He had never thought that Karazhan could be blown away. In Xueqi's opinion, Karazhan was at most like the moon revolving around Earth. Now, it was like the moon had been blown out of the solar system. Not only was it not dead, it was blown away. This strange result made even Xueqi angry. "We really can't go back?" Alexstrasza said helplessly with her hands on her hips. "Aren't you a dragon aspect? Shouldn't you be more capable than a radiant moon mage like me?" Xueqi said in annoyance. "Even dragon aspects have specializations, all right? I'm not good at spatial magic." The queen said angrily, "Speaking of which, you tricked me into coming to Karazhan, but I can't go back. If Azeroth encounters the Burning Legion's general attack, this will be on your head." "There won't be a general attack." Xueqi was very sure of this. At this time, the Titans had not kneeled yet. Sargeras had just been sent into the Abyss, and it would take some time for the Burning Legion to integrate. On the other hand, Killed Jaden also needed the Scourge to further consume the vitality of the world of Azeroth. However, before taking care of Azeroth, it seemed that he had to take care of himself first. Xueqi was speechless. Secretly, he had the system elf scan the situation of all of Karazhan. Not only was there a loss, but there was also oxygen. He didn't know if this counted as flying into outer space. If Karazhan became a real spaceship, then it would be terrible. Even if there were only 5 people and 1 dragon in all of Karazhan, and the oxygen consumption might not be high, once the oxygen was used up, no matter how powerful you were, you would still die. Host, Karazhan seems to still be able to get oxygen through some spatial cracks. According to calculations, it is not a problem to support the daily oxygen supply of 100 people. But the Karazhan seemed to be trapped. When Xueqi saw the 3-dimensional space model of Karazhan, which seemed to be entangled by tens of thousands of messy spiderwebs, Xueqi almost vomited blood on the spot. Every spider silk was a spatial crack of unknown power. If they tried to force their way through, who knew if Karazhan would be cut into pieces? When Xueqi projected this scene for the others to see, everyone's faces were filled with frustration. "All right, I've heard enough bad news. Is there any good news?" Alexstrasza said helplessly. Xueqi snapped his fingers, and Khadgar immediately said, "The good news is that because Master Marcus was preparing to recruit more magic apprentices, he prepared enough food for 1,000 people in Karazhan for a year, as well as various ingredients and seasonings." Karazhan's chief butler, Khadgar, glanced at the Red Dragon Queen. "As long as we pay attention to the preservation of food and Her Majesty Alexstrasza's appetite isn't too shocking, we can last for 20 years without a problem." The queen's chest heaved up and down angrily. "Humph! What a rude assumption. The eternal life of a dragon aspect is not sustained by eating. If there is a day when my magic is too low, I can still enter a deep sleep and endlessly stop my life. Stop talking. At most, I'll cook for you when you're awake. Xueqi silently labeled the queen as a foodie. That's good news. The queen's eyes narrowed into crescent moons. What else? Aurelia finally lost her temper. It seems I can occasionally receive a magical message. Unfortunately, I can only receive it. The message I send back cannot be received. How is the alliance? Gavin Rad asked. A great victory, without a doubt. Compared to the original history where both the Alliance and the Horde suffered heavy losses, the war was even shorter. With Xueqi's intervention, the war this time was even shorter. The aftermath of the explosion still spread through the dark portal to the blasted land, but it was really only at the level of aftermath. The scorching air that flowed out of the spatial rift that had not completely closed, together with a moderate shock wave of the explosion, scattered the orc army near the dark portal. Many of the beast men closest to the door of darkness were even blown away by the wind. However, this gave the Alliance a perfect opportunity to launch a surprise attack. Muradin was astonishingly bold. He directly pushed a large number of mortar teams to the vicinity of the dark portal as the dividing line between the north and south. This allowed the shells to hit the orc camp behind the dark portal without any hindrance. Encountering the moderate explosion of the dark portal and the collapse of the dark portal itself, all the orcs were suddenly exposed to the Alliance's artillery range. The shells could even pass through the ruins of the Horde camp and land on the southernmost cliff of the blasted land. Under Xueqi's guidance, the Alliance had long learned what creeping barrage and infantry artillery coordination was. This tactic was only developed during the Second World War on Earth, and it had epoch-making significance for the current Azeroth. The continuous bombardment caused the beast men to be completely stunned. Many orcs even thought that the explosions of the dark portal had never stopped. Every place plowed by the shells would be attacked by Haas or Tyrallian's cavalry in less than 30 seconds. The Alliance used their high-speed advance in coordination with the bombardment. Just 6,000 cavalry had disrupted nearly 50,000 orc infantry. Looking at the ruins of the dark portal that had disappeared into the blasted land, there was no more hesitation. Anduin had perfectly pressed all the reserves in one go. He had fought a textbook super victory. The chief of the Blood Ring clan, Kilrog Deadeye, had been killed by Daneth Trollbane. The chief of the Bone Chewer clan, Harken Skullbreaker, had been killed by Haas. The chief of the first generation of Death Knights, Tyren Gorfiend, had been destroyed by Tyrallian's Holy Light. This battle could be said to have wiped out the last essence of the Horde. However, after this battle, the Alliance was not in the mood to celebrate. Because the news came that Karazhan had disappeared. The founder of the Alliance, the greatest and wisest hero in the history of the Alliance, Duke Marcus, had disappeared. Even if Antonidas, Krasis, and the others searched and calculated like crazy, they could only deduce the horrifying answer that Karazhan had been destroyed in the vortex of space. No one was willing to believe that Xueqi, who seemed to be unkillable and had survived crisis after crisis, would fall because of the explosion of the dark portal. It was a pity. A week had passed. A month had passed. A whole year had passed. The Alliance had no choice but to declare Xueqi, Theon, Gavin Rad, Aurelia, and Sasha as missing in action. 3 years later, King Valley of Stormwind City erected a statue of them. They were known as the 5 Heroes of Karazhan. Chapter 7:10. Time flew. No matter how brave a warrior was, he would grow old one day. No matter how glorious a legend was, it would eventually be forgotten. In Brill City of the Rotterdam Lund-Tyrus Forest, it had now become one of the well-known gladiatorial arenas of the Rotterdam Kingdom. There would be cruel and bloody gladiatorial performances every day. There were a total of 7 gladiatorial arenas of various sizes, and they were all full every day. The best gladiatorial performances were naturally in Rotterdam City. However, the one that was slightly inferior was Brill City. Now, let us welcome the invincible orc gladiator who has been undefeated for 88 consecutive matches, the brutal Gussa. As the MC shouted through the sound amplification magic, the enthusiasm of the 5,000 spectators was completely ignited. There were people from all directions, including noble local nobles, big businessmen who had made a lot of money, ordinary citizens who came to gamble and try their luck, and even young girls who were supposed to be knitting in their boudoirs. Everyone was shouting with all their might to vent the enthusiasm in their hearts. Gussa! 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 You have to win. I've bet all my salary for this month on you. Accompanied by the sound of heavy metal chains being twisted, a rather young but incredibly strong orc holding a crude stone axe walked out of the dark dungeon and into the arena outside. In front of him was a piece of black land. No matter how many times he tried it, he could not get used to the smell of blood in it. The blood that had coagulated into sludge had long been mixed with the black soil. There were those of his enemies, his compatriots, and himself. Be it the cheers of the humans or the smell of blood in the ground, he did not care. Shrugging his rugged nose, he shifted his gaze to the opposite side. The MC's voice sounded again. And his opponent today is a terrifying creature from the Alterac Snow Mountain that's even more brutal and inhumane than him. Guess what it is? A huge and powerful creature. Inside had yet to come out, but it had already become violent under the stimulation of the human voices. Bang! 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 The giant creature had already crazily hit the iron gate, which was as thick as a human's leg. Wah! As the MC wished, the audience let out a series of exclamations. There were cries of surprise from young girls, cheers from merchants, and even more gasps. Everyone, guess what that is? After he had his fill of suspense, the MC finally roared, "The incomparably powerful Gusa, his opponent today is the Shattered Ridge Snowman King." As expected, the audience screamed even louder. In the eyes of the spectators, this was no longer a normal duel. A terrifying 5-meter-tall Snowman King against a 20-meter-tall orc warrior. This was a battle between an adult and a baby. But there was nothing the organizers could do. Gusa was too powerful. In the past 3 years, he had killed countless opponents. Among the opponents who were slightly close to him, there was no one that Gusa could not kill. Gusa had won too much, and the gamblers could no longer win much money. Even though the odds had reached 10-11, the commoners could still make a small profit even if they blindly bet on Gusa to win. This made the organizers very unhappy. But Gusa was so popular, they could not possibly kill him in private. This was Gusa's last duel. If he did not die, he could only be sold to Rotterdam City and let a stronger enemy kill him. It was said that there were even demonic creatures in Rotterdam's bloodiest arena. However, Gusa's master, Viscount Neris, was still disappointed. Facing the hill-like Snowman King, Gusa was still clean and efficient. When the Snowman King charged over, he immediately used charge and turned into a shadow. He rushed to the Snowman King's shoulder and used Thunder Strike to knock the Snowman King unconscious. Then, he immediately used Whirlwind Slash. After blinding the Snowman King, Gusa dodged the Snowman King's last struggle with an agile little jump. Then, he chopped the Snowman King's neck from the back with his axe. The Snowman King's head flew off just like that. Done. Oh! Gusa shouted in orc language that humans did not understand. Gusa once again returned to his dark and damp cellar. Just as he sat on his straw bed, a deep voice spoke in orc language from next door. "You've worked hard, Geyer." No one knew that Gusa's cellar was located in the deepest part of the underground. There was a secret passage just a wall away. If he wanted to, he could break the wall and leave this place at any time. This kind of monster is only enough for me to warm up. Don't humans have any new ideas? Geyer. Never underestimate humans. There are many strong humans. Gusa did not care about Geyer's title. Instead, he asked, "How many are as strong as you?" Orgrim. Orgrim. It's actually Orgrim? Times had changed, and no one would have thought that Orgrim, who was supposed to have died in the underground prison of Rotterdam City, would appear in this small place, and talk to the young orc called Guile so discreetly through the wall. If you are talking about melee professions, there are at least 3. Anduin Lothar, Uther the Lightbringer, and Sidon Dathrahan? These are the human powerhouses that I need to pay attention to? Geyer frowned. Other than the kings of the various countries, they are the most important? No. What I want to tell you today is that, be it the kings of the various countries or these 3 people, they are all trash compared to the man known as the nemesis of the orcs and the archenemy of the Horde. Remember the name I told you. Imprint it into the deepest part of your soul. Because he is the main culprit behind the Horde's defeat in all 3 wars. Hearing this, Geyer's muscles tensed up subconsciously. Even his breathing became lighter. Orgrim spoke. His name is Duke Marcus. At this moment, near a remote town in the continent of Rotterdam, lightning flashed and thunder roared. Strong winds blew. Countless bolts of lightning converged. The purplish-blue electric snakes twisted and finally carved out a large and standard circle on the ground. It was even rounder than a compass. The outside of the circle was charred black. The green grass and yellow soil were all replaced by black. In the middle of the circle, surprisingly, there was a naked young man. He posed like a statue of the thinker, although his muscles couldn't be considered fit at all. He looked like he deserved a beating. Who am I? Where am I from? Where am I going? Chapter 7:11. Coincidentally, Orgrim was asking Guile the same question in the cellar of Brill's Colosseum. Do you still remember the 3 questions I asked you? Yes. You asked, who are you? Where are you from? Where are you going? Guile replied in a steady voice. Then, have you thought of the answer? Yes, I have. Guile's voice was sonorous and powerful. Speak. Guile stood up abruptly and spoke in the orc language with a thunderous might. I am Guile, the son of the great Frostwolf tribe chief Durotan and the powerful female warrior Draka. I come from the other side of the Dark Portal, the planet that the humans call Draenor. I want to lead my orc brethren to escape from the human slavery and go to a place where the orcs can rest. On the other side of the wall, Orgrim also stood up excitedly. He and Guile had their backs against each other. Even though there was only a thin wall between them, he could feel the warmth from Guile's back through the wall and into his heart. Very good. Very good. If Durotan and Draka could see you in such a heroic state, they would definitely be very happy. Orgrim was very pleased. Does my answer have anything to do with that Duke Marcus you mentioned? If he's such an important person, why haven't I heard of his name in all my years in Lordaeron? Because his name is a taboo in Lordaeron. Orgrim spent a whole hour explaining how Duque had used a series of methods to destroy the Horde's attack, as well as the relationship between the Alliance and Lordaeron, as well as the relationship between Duque and King Tyrrhenas. Guile frowned. If this Duque is really so terrifying, then he will indeed be the biggest obstacle to our tribe's rebirth. But didn't you say that he's been missing for 10 years, and the Alliance has marked him as a dead man? Why do we still have to worry about him? Orgrim sighed. Some people are still alive, but he's already dead. Like Tyrrhenas Menethil. I can even deal with an old fool like him. However, there is a type of person who is more terrifying in death than in life. This type of person is Duke Marcus. Orgrim's gaze seemed to pierce through the dark tunnel, through the boundless sky, back to the glorious days of war. After a long time he said, if it's just Rotterdam, we only need to rescue our compatriots. We alone are enough to overthrow this country. However, things were different with the addition of the Eastern Kingdom. That is a completely different, higher-level world. A higher level? Have you ever seen a sailboat on Lordemere Lake? Yes. Do you know that the southern continent is using steamships with smoke coming out from the top of the ship? Do you know that the southern continent can transport 10,000 soldiers at a speed faster than a horse for 1,000 miles in a day and a night? Do you know that humans can make 1,000 of the sharpest swords in an hour? And those cannons that can destroy a small mountain? Guile fell silent. This is the new thing that the man named Duke Marcus has brought to the world of Azeroth. Orgrim looked dispirited. My body is not old, but my brain can no longer keep up with the new things. I only know that if we fight for freedom in the old ways, it will only bring true destruction to the orcs and the Horde. So, I put my hope in you, the person that the shaman prophesied. I hope that you can lead the orcs out of this cruel fate. I will. Guile said without hesitation. Do you have any other suggestions? Do in the main what you think. My last suggestion came from the shaman who persuaded me to protect you. He hoped that you would change your name to Thrall on the day of your rebellion. Thrall. Guile was confused. That was the name my subordinates gave you when they transferred you out of another slave camp. It was the name given to you by Lord Blackmore of Gerton. Why do I have to use the name given to me by a human slave master? Guile was filled with indescribable anger. Because this is a name of destiny. It represents the knowledge you have learned from humans, your integration with human culture, and your true destiny. Orgrim's voice became very solemn. Believe in the Lord. If not for his great sacrifice, You would have been killed by the assassins sent by Xueqi 13 years ago. Only by returning to destiny will the god of destiny protect you. All right, I agree. From today onwards, my name is Thrall. Guile no, Thrall replied loudly. Very well, you will not regret this, child of Durotan. I will leave the rest to you. Yes, orcs will never be slaves. Thrall gripped his axe tightly. At the same time, the young man who appeared in the lightning looked like he was in pain. He stood up with difficulty. F***CK, I've actually become Arnold Schwarzenegger. The young man looked around. Sigh, luckily there is no one around. Otherwise, I would definitely be treated as a pervert. As soon as he tried to move, his first movement made him stagger and he almost fell. It was obvious that he was not used to his body. My body. He looked down. His sword was still there. Even without testing, he knew it was normal. Damn, the wind blew the eggs cold. Since it was functioning normally, the other tests could be ignored. No. After checking again and again, he finally confirmed that his body was intact. He was surprised and happy. After suffering for so long, he had finally returned to Azeroth. Even though he had been through countless dangers and seen countless storms, he could not help but feel a little excited. Finally, he took a deep breath and shouted, "Ha ha ha! Azeroth! I, Duhon-san, have returned to harm you." For a moment, the sky was filled with lightning and thunder. It was as if Azeroth could not wait to strike this scourge down. I must be joking. This is actually the aftermath of teleportation. Aftermath. Yes. He was the handsome duke that everyone hated. Flowers withered at the sight of him, and cars had flat tires at the sight of him. Taking a deep breath of the fresh air of Azeroth, Xueqi, who had experienced the cruelty of long-distance teleportation across the universe, finally realized his current situation. Damn, a lot of my magic circuits have been burned. F***CK. My storage bag is finished. Damn, I'm still naked. No, before thinking about that, I need to wash the dust off my body. It's so uncomfortable. Xueqi, who did not dare to use magic for the time being, ran to a nearby stream to take a bath. Just as Xueqi was washing up, a soft sound suddenly came from behind. Xueqi turned around and saw a girl looking at him in shock. The next moment, Xueqi complained, "Why are you peeping at me while I'm bathing?" Chapter 7:12. Once upon a time, before Xueqi had transmigrated, there had been such a fatty. It had been a large gathering, and many people had been assigned to various rooms in the hotel. One of the girls had probably been confused and remembered the wrong room number, thinking that it was her roommate inside. In the end, the girl rang the doorbell and found that the person who opened the door was a pale fatty with only a bath towel draped over his lower body. The scene was extremely awkward, but this guy was the first to react. He screamed, "Molestation!" He slammed the door shut, leaving the confused girl outside feeling extremely wronged. Right. Duke had done the same thing, but by different means. No matter what happened, he had to scare the other party first. Duke's words smashed into the white-haired girl's head, causing her to be dumbfounded. After a long time, she finally reacted. You. After saying "you" 3 times, she could not continue. The girl was obviously very pure, but she already looked like she was about to cry. Seeing this, Xueqi could not bear to see her like this. Sorry, I was just joking. Xueqi's dog eyes unexpectedly saw this girl wearing a red priest's robe. It was summer, and her legs were very white. Where are you looking? The girl suddenly became alert and raised the staff in her hand. That's right, this was a naked man. What if he went berserk? No, you misunderstood. I saw that your clothes are very familiar. Are you from the Scarlet Crusade? Xueqi was not sure, so he asked tentatively. It's the Scarlet Crusade. The girl corrected. Actually, I'm not a member of the army. I just borrowed clothes to wear. The pure young girl's true colors were immediately revealed. Although Scarlet Crusade and Scarlet Crusade only had a difference of one word, the meaning was very different. The former was a fanatical organization, while the latter only represented a legion of the Kingdom of Lordaeron. Xueqi instantly grasped the general timeline. Seems like it's not too late for me to roll back. Sorry. I'm from the mountains. I lost a bet and was thrown into the water by my buddy, then washed down the river. Can I ask, what time is it now? Which year? Looking at Xueqi, who was half submerged in the water and giving off a suspicious aura, the young lady gripped her staff tightly and took half a step back. Her eyes were filled with wariness and distrust. However, she still answered Xueqi. It's year 15 of the Dark Portal. You're currently near Taryn Mill in the Hillsbrad Hills. Mr. Suspicious. Hey, am I being despised? Am I, who is handsome, elegant, and charming, is being looked down upon? At this moment, Xueqi could not stop crying in his heart. 10,000 alpacas galloped through his mind. After a while, Xueqi came back to his senses. Sorry, I'm not the kind of person you think I am. The young girl was still vigilant. Her large watery eyes and white hair made her expression seem even colder. She was clearly saying that he was that kind of pervert. Xueqi lost his temper. You're a priest, right? For the sake of the holy light, can you get me a set of clothes? The young girl lightly pursed her bright red lips. Since the other party was already using the holy light, she finally nodded. She then faced Xueqi and took 3 steps back. After making sure that Xueqi could not jump out of the river, the young girl turned around and ran without looking back. This. Sigh. Just when Xueqi thought that the young girl would break her promise and was about to use leaves to make a grass skirt to cover her body, the young girl still came back with a set of rough linen clothes and a young man who acted as her protector. The young man was very tall and had a steady look, but his short beard revealed that he was less than 16 years old. His trembling left hand on the hilt of his sword revealed his guilt. Of course, Xueqi would not do anything to them. When the young girl turned around, Xueqi quickly went ashore and used the cloth that the young man had left on the shore to dry his body. He then put on the rough linen clothes that he had not worn for many years. Ugh, what a nostalgic feeling. When I first transmigrated, I seem to have worn this too. Seeing that although Xueqi's origins were strange, he did not seem to have any ill intentions, the young man slightly lowered his guard. Mister, may I ask what your name is? Xueqi. Xueqi casually replied. What about you guys? Thank you for your help. I would like to at least know your names. Reynolds. Sorry. The young boy and girl only said their names, but just like Xueqi, they purposely ignored their surnames. However, when Sari heard Xueqi's name, she revealed a look of yearning. Ah, you're also called Xueqi. After the last great battle, many people's children are called Xueqi. Hearing this, Xueqi could not help but smile. In the entire world, there is only one Xueqi. Reynolds said solemnly. Sari did not refute. All right, as a knight candidate, I cannot sit by and watch a stranger wander around here alone. After all, it is not safe around here recently. Mr. Xueqi, I strongly suggest that you come with us. Reynolds suddenly said. Not safe? Hearing this, Xueqi frowned. Yes, this is not confirmed news. However, there have been many strange humanoid monsters recently. What kind of monsters are they? They look like humans, but they eat and bite people. They have dark gray skin. Xueqi's expression suddenly changed. Damn, the Scourge army has appeared? This is really bad news. Xueqi found that he could not determine what time it was. However, it was obvious that Nazul had begun to exert his power as the Lich King. However, whether it was the cursing sect secretly stirring up trouble, or Arthas had already fallen, this was still unknown. Let's go. Bring me to Alexandros Mograine, or Alfred Abendis. Xueqi's expression darkened. He turned around and walked away, not caring if the boy and girl followed him or not. After living in Azeroth for so long, experiencing 3 big battles and facing countless hardships, Xueqi knew what he had to do. Upon hearing these 2 names abruptly, the young Reynolds seemed to have been greatly stimulated. He looked like he was startled. In the Scarlet Cross Army, it was impossible for the boy and girl not to know what these 2 names meant. What shocked them was Xueqi's tone. After all, these 2 lords weren't just any Tom, Dick, or Harry. Looking at the whole world, how many people would dare to call them by their names? However, this mysterious Xueqi dared to do so. He really wanted to scold this Xueqi. How dare you? However, the man's natural and typical aura of a superior made Reynolds involuntarily obey the man's lofty orders. This way. Chapter 7:13. Walking on the narrow path in the forest, Xueqi had a lot on his mind. Yes. He had returned, but he was in a terrible state. Although he looked fine on the outside, he was the only one who knew how hard it had been to play interstellar travel. He was the first to come back. He had to do this. Karazhan was wrapped in a spider web of countless spatial cracks in the depths of the spacetime tunnel. Apart from him, no one else could come out. Although Alexstrasza could transform into human form, the amount of mana needed to teleport her was too great. Apart from her, no one else was good at magic. Although Khadgar was much stronger, the problem was that this ghost mage was almost an earthbound spirit, and it was difficult for him to leave Karazhan. In the end, after being trapped for too long, Xueqi still teleported back alone after preparing for a long time. It had been an extremely dangerous journey. Even with the help of the system elf, Xueqi had almost died in the void. After all, there were many times when one had to change directions at supersonic speeds 3 or 4 times in a second. This was really not something a human could do. But after returning, Xueqi had 2 serious problems. First, he had burned many magic circuits. Roughly speaking, his power had temporarily fallen to the level of an ordinary radiant moon mage. But if he was given some time to reorganize his magic circuits, it should not be a problem for him to rush back to the half-step breaking dawn he had once achieved in Karazhan. Second, the system elf seemed to have gone silent. No matter how he called out, there was no response. He did not know whether it was the solar storm or the influence of the spatial magnetic field, but the system elf was temporarily on its knees. Both greatly affected Xueqi's strength. As Xueqi walked, he asked Renaud about the current situation. Even though he had scared Renaud still tried to answer his questions carefully and selectively. Through Renaud, Xueqi at least learned a few important pieces of information. Over the past 10 years, Rotterdam had been constantly nibbling away at the original Alterac territory. Now, apart from South Shore, which had been upgraded to the South Sea city-state and gained autonomy, the rest of the territory basically belonged to Rotterdam. However, the shattered ridge that was originally part of Alterac Royal City was abandoned by the Rotterdam Kingdom due to the large number of snowmen occupying it and the fact that they had failed to clear it out many times. King Lang Rin was assassinated by an orc sword saint in the 8th year of the Dark Portal. Since then, Anjouan Lothar had been the regent to assist the young King William. However, in the past 2 years, Duke Bolvar Dragon had been the regent due to Lothar's poor health. When he heard Reynolds say that the holy city of Stratholme was fine, Xueqi felt a little relieved. In that case, according to the original history, Arthas should not have fallen. If that was the case, the situation did not seem to be the worst. However, when Xueqi asked about Arthas's situation, Reynolds became even more vigilant. "Didn't you tell Sally that you were from the mountains? Why do you care so much about Arthas?" Xueqi felt wronged. Xueqi was rather speechless at the vigilance of this pair of underage boys and girls. Just as Xueqi was about to say something, the wind suddenly brought with it a terrible stench. Sally covered her mouth, and even Reynolds, who looked like a protector, had a hard time holding back the urge to vomit. It was the unique smell of a slaughterhouse, with a hint of disgusting sweetness. No, it was not the smell of fresh meat, but the stench of rotting corpses. It had been too long since Xueqi had smelled something like this. Only after burying corpses on the battlefield for a few days would there be such a smell. The rotting smell came from a house near the forest path. It was now very clear what had happened inside. Sally turned to Reynolds. Her face was pale but determined. "I have to go in and check. If there are dead souls inside that I need to expiate." Suddenly, along with the poisonous gas of death, a horrifying shriek filled the entire forest. Something pounced at them from inside and behind the house at an alarming speed. Without hesitation, Reynolds immediately pulled out the sword at his waist and pointed it at the intruder with a trembling sword tip. Following the light from the tip of the sword, Reynolds' eyes met a pair of pitch-black eye sockets. Reynolds, who had never been on a real battlefield, was shocked to find that he did not know how to react to this walking nightmare. It wore a tattered shirt and work clothes, holding a pitchfork as a weapon. It should have been a farmer in the past, but that was when it was alive. Right now, it was clearly a dead person. Grayish-green rotting flesh fell off its bones, and rotten fingers left filthy marks on the handle of the pitchfork. Black sticky liquid flowed out of the pustules. It howled, stinking saliva dripping from the corner of its black mouth. Sally cried out in alarm. This cry seemed to have frightened Reynolds. He was stunned for a moment, and almost couldn't raise his sword in time before he was stabbed by the pitchfork. Fortunately, his years of training had formed his body's combat instincts. He managed to knock the pitchfork out of the zombie's hand with his sharp sword, and then he swung his sword horizontally across the zombie's neck. The neck that had lost its tenacity gave Reynolds a disgusting feeling, as though he had cut a pile of rotten grass. Then, the filthy head flew into the air, and a stinking liquid sprayed out from the severed neck, splattering half of Reynolds' face. After losing its head, the thing fell flat on its back and never got up again. As a priest in training, Sally used a holy light spell. Even though she knocked down a zombie, it was replaced by even more zombies. This was far more than what the two of them could handle. "Sally, run!" Reynolds cried out in alarm. Even though his hands were trembling, he still chose to let the lady run first. At this moment, the two of them suddenly heard whooshing sounds. It was the sound of something breaking through the air. Countless fireballs flew past them, hitting the bodies of the swarming zombies. The fireballs exploded, and while the disgusting monsters were blown away, the stench in the air was immediately replaced by the smell of burnt flesh. The noisy roars of the monsters had been reduced by 90%, and the clearest sound in the air was the crackling of the flames. In the distance, more zombies tried to rush over. Reynolds and Sally looked back at the same time, only to see 10 small flames burning steadily on Duque's slender fingertips, like 10 harmless orange flowers. The next moment, the flames poured out, turning into huge fireballs the size of water tanks that smashed towards the group of monsters. In a few moments, dozens of monsters were kneeling. Sally asked in a trembling voice, "Who are you?" Chapter 7:14. This was not an ordinary fireball. It was summer, and an ordinary fireball could easily cause a forest fire. However, Duque's fireball was different. The fireball looked huge, and as soon as it hit, the zombies were instantly set ablaze. Even Reynolds and Sally, who were more than 10 meters away, subconsciously raised their hands to shield themselves from the scorching heat wave. Just this power alone was enough to be more powerful than any master mage they had ever seen. They wanted to observe Duque, the mysterious young mage, but the situation with the zombies quickly forced them to turn their attention. Originally, Reynolds wanted to finish them off with a sword, such as killing the zombies that were not completely destroyed by the flames and were still charging at them. Zombies did not feel pain. If they were really caught by a burning zombie, then the flames on their bodies would become a fatal weapon to kill Reynolds. However, Duque's fireball had unimaginable power. The flames quickly charred the zombies' muscles, turning them into human-shaped ashes. Strangely, before the zombies fell to the ground, the flames on their bodies would be extinguished. Soon, everything was silent. There were no unpleasant roars from the zombies, no twitching of the zombies, not even the sound of flames gnawing on corpses or wooden houses. The hot summer wind blew slowly, making a sigh in the forest. No matter who this mysterious young mage called Duque was, Reynolds and Sally were glad to see that the zombies were all burned to ashes. Duque did not answer Sally's question about who he was. He did not look good. He had thought that he had returned early. At least the Scourge army had not started to wreak havoc, so there should be no big problem. After all, Thuzat had been tricked by Duque more than 10 years ago, and even his soul had been worn away by the holy light. Even if there was a cursing sect, they should not be too strong. Now, it did not seem to be the case. This was not the level of the cursing sect using human subjects for experiments. This should be considered the outbreak of the Scourge, even if it was only in the early stages. Suddenly, the sound of fierce fighting came with the wind. There were people being attacked, and there were quite a few of them. Duque frowned and turned his head. "Protect yourselves." Without looking back, he used blink to leave. It was a blink that covered a distance of more than 30 meters. When Duque reappeared 30 meters away, he seemed to curse, ran a few steps, and then blink again. In their eyes, Duque was already a monstrous existence. Reynolds turned his head. "If he had wanted to make a move on you not long ago," Sally smiled bitterly. "How would I know? Fortunately, he is on the side of the humans." "What do we do now?" Sally said firmly. "Follow them." "But we're not here to. We're just trainees. The order wasn't given to us, was it?" "As a believer of the holy light, I cannot allow myself to stand by and do nothing." Sally smiled, and her snow-white short hair gave off a kind of holiness that Reynolds had always been secretly fascinated by. Reynolds roughly wiped off the disgusting liquid that stuck to his body and sword, and ran in the direction that Xueqi disappeared in. It didn't take them long to reach their destination. It was a very tragic battlefield. On the main road, there were at least hundreds of zombies surrounding a carriage. The carriage should belong to a high noble, because other than high nobles, no one would have more than 30 guards and a magician as a bodyguard. This team of guards looked well trained, but the difference in strength between them and the enemy was too great. If it wasn't for the huge fireballs that kept shooting out from the carriage, the pitiful circular formation of the guards would have been broken long ago. Even so, looking at the huge crisscrossing claw marks on the carriage, one could tell that the line of defense of the carriage had actually been broken. A chill rose from Reynolds' tailbone to his head. Damn it! This is the main road that connects the Dalajan and Torrential Fortress. I just passed by here yesterday. When did there become so many living dead? The only fortunate thing was that with Duke's arrival, the situation of the caravan being besieged had changed greatly. 3 firewalls rose outside the carriage, and every zombie that dared to rush into the firewalls would be burned to ashes within a few steps, turning into a pile of black charcoal. Even though the zombies were still charging at the carriage, the guards of the carriage let out a sigh of relief when an advanced magician came to their rescue. Standing on the hill, Xueqi flicked his fingers continuously, and fireballs rained down on the group of zombies. Each fireball was just right, and several zombies were instantly smashed into pieces. After a few minutes, the world was quiet. After the firewalls were down, 2 of the surviving guards walked over, as if they wanted to thank Xueqi. However, Xueqi used flash, bypassed the 2 guards, and went straight to the front of the carriage. His sudden action caused the guards to be on their guard. These days, the world was not fair. Not everyone who would stand by and watch someone die was a scoundrel. Not everyone who saved you must be a saint. The remaining guards did not raise their swords, but each of them looked at Xueqi with vigilance. Although these faces were young, and none of them were middle-aged, their calm aura told Xueqi that each of them had been on the battlefield and seen blood. This, Sir Magician. Seeing Xueqi's linen clothes, the leader of the guards could not associate Xueqi with those noble magicians who wore luxurious magician robes. Unfortunately, Xueqi's powerful magic was an indisputable fact. Therefore, the leader of the guards tried to use more respectful and tactful words. Xueqi was very excited. Yes, that's right. It had been 10 years since he left the world of Azeroth. Although 10 years could not be said to have changed the world, many things had changed greatly. For example, the death of King Lang. He did not know how many traces he had left in this world. In front of him was a group of guards who had hidden their markings, but when he saw the familiar insignia on the guards' bodies, he could no longer control his emotions. Ignoring the nervous guards, Xueqi walked to the carriage with his head held high and cleared his throat. An old friend is visiting. Excuse me, who is the current head of the Marcus family in Stormwind? There was silence in the carriage, but 3 seconds later, an excited female voice was heard. It was me, but now it's you. Ha! Before Xueqi could react, he only saw the carriage door suddenly burst open, and then a slim figure, like a moth flying into a flame, threw herself at Xueqi. The confused Xueqi had a terrible intimate contact with the back of his head against the black ground. The next moment, he felt a soft and sweet touch on his lips. Chapter 7:15. This was a bloody battlefield that had just been visited by death and evil. This was a horrifying place with countless corpses. But it was in such an unnatural place that the guards realized that their goddess, for the first time, was like an ordinary woman who had fallen into the mortal world. 10 years ago, when Alterac was swept by the flames of war, even the king was humiliated, and the country was annexed, when they lost their parents, lost their loved ones, lost a shelter, and were about to starve to death on the streets. It was this holy girl who was like a goddess who saved their lives and souls. Gave them food. Gave them warmth. Gave them life and a future. This was not an unconditional redemption, and they had to give up their future for it. They were willing to accept it, because without the present, there would be no future. They quietly received the strictest training, and endured the torment that ordinary children had never experienced, all for the sake of protecting this woman who was not much older than them, but had saved them. In their hearts, this noble lady was their goddess. They watched her manage such a large territory, watched her lead the people, and brought life back to the land that had been destroyed by the flames of war. But they had never seen her, who was as beautiful as a goddess, truly smile at any man. Countless nobles had proposed to her, and even Prince Stromgard had once favored her, but without exception, all of them had been firmly rejected. In the face of any man's ambiguous invitation, she would become the most unreasonable ice goddess. That was good. It was as if an extraordinary woman like her should not be owned by any ordinary man. The young guards looked at her with longing in their eyes as they quietly stood guard by her side. 10 years. She had never had any scandals. She was a mage, but she was more like a saint than any female priest in the Church of Holy Light. It was precisely because of this that she abruptly, without any warning, threw herself at the man in coarse linen clothes, and unreservedly offered her own passionate kiss. Ah. Their tongues intertwined passionately. The guards were stunned, but at the same time, they found it hard to believe that their goddess had fallen in love with a hero who had saved her. Xueqi, who was at the bottom, almost suffocated. The strong love from her made him intoxicated, but also made him embarrassed. She had no intention of stopping, and Xueqi had to pat her back a few times. No response. He pretended not to feel it. Continue to attack. That lilac tongue continued to attack the city and sweep the ground. There were a few more claps, accompanied by the sound of a serious cough. She finally propped herself up reluctantly and saw the continuous silver thread between their lips and tongues. Both of them blushed a little. Damn it! You don't have to do this. Elucia. Xueqi had an awkward expression on his face. That's right. This noble lady was naturally Miss Elucia Barov. What the hell? I should be the one saying this. You bastard. I've been gone for 10 years. Elucia's face was full of resentment. Killed Jaden secretly gave Nazul a super bomb. Even Karazhan was blown away. Xueqi said innocently. I know it's not your fault. Elucia's waterfall-like soft black hair fell on Xueqi's cheek, tickling Xueqi. At this point, Elucia's voice suddenly became smaller. It was a mosquito's hum that only Xueqi could hear. You promised to give me a coming-of-age ceremony, but you're 10 years late. This is the truth. Xueqi was speechless. Because she was kneeling, her neckline hung down. At this angle, Elucia's mature female body was almost completely exposed. She was obviously so shy that she was about to explode. Her pretty face and neck were covered in crimson, but Elucia did not adjust her posture. She wanted Xueqi to see to his heart's content. She had indeed grown. The once unripe fruit had become a ripe peach. It was obvious that Elucia had been working out. That was not the healthy figure that a female magician should have. And because Elucia had eternal life, her body's age would forever be solidified when she was young. Xueqi swallowed his saliva. At this time, Reynolds and Sally, who were not far away, were completely dumbfounded. Reynolds said, That seems to be Marchioness Elucia Barov of Stormwind? What a beautiful person. How did she get together with Xueqi? Oh my God. They kissed. Sally held her face in her hands. She knew that her face was burning. Girls love heroes. The scene in front of them was a hero saving a damsel in distress, followed by a beauty falling in love with him. This was the template of a night novel. The corner of Reynolds' mouth twitched. He was a little unconvinced, but he could not be unconvinced. With such a large number of zombies in front of him, he would die of exhaustion if he just stood still and let him cut them down. They were not like mages, who could throw a bunch of fireballs and the world would be peaceful. He had also thought too highly of mages. Only Xueqi could be so awesome, and a half-crippled Xueqi at that. On the other side, although Xueqi was very happy that Elucia still loved him and waited for him for a full 10 years, he still did not forget the urgency of the situation. Let's put it aside for now. We still have a long way to go. Hearing the words, we still have a long way to go, Elucia's face became even redder. Elucia, tell me first, what happened? When did these zombies appear? What's the situation in the various countries now? Xueqi asked quickly. Elucia hurriedly stood up. She quickly combed her beautiful black hair. In just 3 short seconds, she had once again entered the role of the strong woman who replaced Xueqi to control the Marcus family. The appearance of zombies happened last summer in July. At that time, it was only an isolated case. Lord Darren strongly condemned it, saying that it was the result of the Dalajan's forbidden experiments. After all, 10 years ago, small undead creatures such as rabbits began to appear near the Dalajan. Even though they claimed that they had all been killed at that time. Damn, it was Kel'Thuzad's fault. Elucia continued, I have been paying attention to the situation here according to your instructions. South Shore is also a spy that we left behind. This time, I came here to deal with the unstable orcs. There is evidence that the orc slaves are organizing a riot. Xueqi was stunned. What the hell? The Scourge army was about to move. Why did the orcs suddenly start a slave uprising? Wouldn't that mean that Thrall was going to make an appearance? The Scarlet Cross army was specially mobilized. If it wasn't for such a major event, Terenas would not want to let Lordairen's signature army leave Lordairen when the prince returns in triumph. Wait! Duke suddenly had an ominous feeling that something bad was about to happen. Chapter 7:16. Xueqi had harmed Azeroth, saved powerful people, cheated orcs, harmed demons, and was cheated by demons. In any case, the original course of history of Azeroth had long been changed beyond recognition. Without the system elf statistics, Xueqi did not know how similar Azeroth was over the past 10 years. Anyway, even if Kael that's jumped out and said that he was not a prince, but a princess and begged Kill Jaden to keep him, Xueqi would still try to believe him. The world had collapsed quite a bit, so it was not a big deal. Xueqi did not know why there was no scene of Prince Arthas slaughtering Stratholme and beginning to fall into depravity. But he remembered very clearly that Arthas' return from Northrend was the symbolic event when he led the Scourge army onto the main stage of Azeroth's history for the first time. Xueqi suddenly became nervous. He grabbed Elusia's arms tightly. Wait, are you talking about the triumphant return of Prince Arthas? Elusia's clear eyes widened as she looked at Xueqi with slight confusion. 10 years. In her impression, Xueqi was perfect. He could summon clouds with a flip of his hand and rain with another. While talking and laughing, he had burned the orc army of 1,000,000 to ashes. In an understatement, he had reversed the fate of the Barov family and killed the ancient evil dragon, Deathwing, Nesario. In her impression, there were not many things that could make Xueqi so nervous. If Xueqi was like this, it was either that Xueqi, who had not seen him for 10 years, had become an ordinary person, or that it was a very important matter. Elusia, who had been guarding the territory of the Elven Forest for Xueqi, did not hesitate to believe that it was the latter. After pulling Xueqi into the carriage, Elusia quickly reported the recent situation to Xueqi. Unlike Reynolds' hesitant and timid exchange of information, this was an unreserved disclosure. This starts from the resurrection of the Mediv, who warned the countries as a prophet. Why did it sound like history had returned to square one? In the end, Mediv was resurrected by his omnipotent mother. He had just been resurrected, and although Mediv didn't have that heaven-defying magic power, he was still a radiant moon. He first turned into a crow and flew to the various kingdoms to warn the various kings. The Burning Legion's new plot was about to be launched, and the only chance to avoid the danger was to move the entire kingdom away from the eastern kingdoms to the other side of the sea, to the continent of Kalimdor, which was still a barren land. However, not a single king was willing to believe him. Forget about the fact that Mediv had lured the orcs into the dark portal when he was being controlled. Just the fact that he had come back to life was enough for any king to be suspicious of him, let alone his exaggerated statement. Move the entire country? What kind of joke was this? How could the migration of 1,000,000 people be easy? Back in the Stormwind, they were beaten like dogs, and even the capital city was destroyed. Who would take a boat to cross the sea to escape? In this world where land was their lifeline, the kings scoffed at Medivh's warning. The only one who had a slightly positive response was Stormwind. Anduin Lothar, who was on sick leave, warmly received his old friend. After a conversation, Anduin was extremely sure that his old friend had really come back to life. This was definitely a great comfort to Lothar, who had no children, and whose only friend Lang had died and Xueqi had gone missing in the void. Then, after listening to Medivh's statement, Anduin summoned Regent Bolvar, and even asked Elusia, who had replaced Xueqi in the internal affairs, and King Varian, who was almost an adult, to discuss the matter. In the end, he still rejected Medivh's proposal. Firstly, it was difficult to leave one's homeland, and secondly, before Xueqi sent Elusia away from Karazhan, he had left behind a lot of backup plans. After knowing that his old friend had long been prepared and was very confident in protecting the country, Mediv did not insist anymore. After informing all the kings, Mediva's figure disappeared from the vision of the nobles of the various countries. Not long after, all kinds of crises came unexpectedly. The first was the rebellion of the orcs. After 10 years of recuperation, coupled with the fact that the countries led by the Rotterdam Kingdom did not strictly adhere to the plan of extermination that Xueqi had set for the orcs back then. After all, the orcs had recovered a lot of vitality. Moreover, because the orcs no longer consumed the blood of demons, their tempers were not as violent as in the old tribes. In the end, many compassionate Virgin Mary secretly condoned and released the orcs, causing the total number of orcs to break the 200,000 mark again. Of course, that was the number that Alusia had calculated. The nobles of the Rotterdam Kingdom who used the orcs to play gladiatorial games all day would only be idiots to see that the total number of orcs did not seem to be that many. The orcs had all gone to the wilderness, so of course, there were not many orcs within the jurisdiction of the Rotterdam Kingdom. Then, it was the rise of the Calamity Army that was the highlight. Just like what Xueqi knew in history, it was Kel'Thuzad who had sought refuge with the Lich King who spread the plague. However, because Kel'Thuzad had been tricked by Xueqi back then, even though his power had been resurrected by the Lich King, his power was no longer the same. He had completely become a schemer. He had spread the plague throughout the entire Eastern Kingdom, but had only succeeded in the Rotterdam Kingdom in the north. It was not that his subordinates from the cursing sect had not tried to poison within the borders of Stormwind. Unfortunately, a set of health and epidemic prevention system that he did not understand at all caused his people to show their true colors easily. Following Xueqi's teachings, Alusia directly asked her subordinates to use the holy light to interrogate the human traitors who had sought refuge with the Calamity Army. The plague raged within the borders of the Rotterdam Kingdom as expected, and because of Xueqi's other backup plan, the entire Stratholme was strictly guarded. As a result, no residents were infected, and there was no massacre of the city that should have happened in history. However, fate seemed to be mocking Xueqi. Xueqi had arranged everything 10 years in advance, but he was tricked by the River of Fate, which secretly took a turn and circled back to the starting point. What? Arthas burned an orphanage and burned hundreds of infected children to death? Xueqi was silent. This could not be said to be Arthas's fault. Arthas was originally a good young man who loved his people and believed in the holy light. Unfortunately, he had been chosen by Nazul. Needless to say, Nazul was most likely played to death by Kil'jaeden, leaving only his soul in the ice, and then he promised to work for the Burning Legion. Nazul did not think that the treacherous Kil'jaeden would fulfill his original promise. He knew that once the mission was completed, he would lose his value and be abandoned by the Burning Legion. Therefore, he had been looking for a body that he liked, a victim that wandered between light and darkness. As long as he could occupy that body, he could escape from the imprisonment of the Frost Throne. He had his eyes on Arthas Menethil, a noble prince. Chapter 7:17. When someone was working hard to satisfy their desires, they would do their best, and even deviate from some of their own principles of life. In history, there were countless people who used unscrupulous means to achieve their goals. Arthas had such a sign at this time. Under such circumstances, once the fuse was lit, it was possible for people to lose themselves. After personally witnessing the infected soldiers turn into zombies, driven by anger and despair, Arthas gradually lost control. He burned down the orphanage, and when his teacher Uther and Jaina arrived to help, they could only see the church-like orphanage burning, and hear the desperate cries of the orphans before they died. Arthas fell into a trap. In the face of an evil plot, his honest and kind heart was finally covered with the dust of regret and guilt. No one knew that these dust would slowly turn into a virus, reproduce by itself, and corrode his heart. Then the young prince in the joint plot of the Dreadlord, Kel'Thuzad, and the Lich King Nazul, was lured into an expedition to Northrend, and embarked on a path of no return. And his return meant that he had embarked on the path of a death knight. In the carriage, after listening to Alusia's report, Xueqi was speechless for a long time. If he had been in Azeroth, naturally, there would not have been the fall of Arthas. Unfortunately, he was blown away. Holding Alusia's soft and boneless hand, Xueqi sighed. When did Arthas' return happen? 3 days ago. However, in the last 3 days, we have lost contact with Lordaeron City, and no one has any news about Lordaeron City. Alusia's answer made Xueqi's heart sink. Was it still a step too late? Yes, too late. 3 days ago, when fresh rose petals were scattered all over the streets of Lordaeron City, when the cheers of 100,000 people rang through the sky, no one would have thought that they would be greeted by a death god. Arthas killed the mastermind of the plague, Thuzad, beheaded the dreadlord Mal'Ganis, went on an expedition to Northrend, killed the mastermind who created the undead, and returned with a runic sword called Frostmourne. What a great achievement this was! What a divine miracle it was! The people were enthusiastically chanting Arthas's name. They longed for the heroic Arthas to ascend the throne after the death of the old king. In the reconstructed throne hall, Tarina's Menethil's throne was high up. He looked with satisfaction at Arthas, who was wearing a black hood and a black cloak, kneeling on one knee at the foot of the throne. Even though this prince had a crescent-shaped blade, a skull gauntlet, and an ominous rune sword, he had a strange aura about him. But in the eyes of Tarina's, who craved for glory, everything was valiant. 10 years, a full 10 years. Ever since the abominable Duke Marcus took away the dominant position of the Rotterdam Kingdom in the alliance and the glory of the people of the Rotterdam Kingdom, someone from the Rotterdam Kingdom could finally stand up and become the new light of the Rotterdam Kingdom. Not the valiant Abendis. Fearless Mograine was no good. Not even the benevolent Archbishop Fail. Only his own son, the only legitimate heir of the Menethil royal family, Arthas Menethil, had the right to enjoy this great honor. Tarina's was very satisfied. He was so satisfied that he ignored all the warning signs of danger. He subconsciously ignored the reports of the prince's strange movements and too many troops from his subordinates. He also diverted Uther and his Silver Hand Knights, who had a disagreement with Arthas over the burning of the orphanage and the treatment of the plague victims. Tarina's, under the ridicule of fate, had sent himself to his death. Ah! My son! Tarina's happily stood up from the throne. However, Arthas's reply left him a little confused. You do not have to sacrifice yourself for your people anymore. You do not have to bear the heavy burden of the crown for them anymore. I have arranged everything. Ha! Tarina's was extremely shocked. What was this speech? At this moment, Prince Arthas, who was kneeling on the ground, suddenly stood up and lifted his hood, revealing a pale face. The contours of his face had not changed. He was still the handsome Arthas Menethil, but his pale skin and snow-white hair made Tarina's even more shocked. Wasn't my son blonde? How did he become as old and white as me? While Tarina's was still in shock, Arthas held Frostmourne in his hand and strode up the stairs to the throne. Without the king's permission, it was very rude to step on the stairs to the throne without the king's permission. If it were someone else, the royal guards beside Tarina's would have already stopped them. But he was Arthas, the only heir of the Menethil royal family. With the king aging and not knowing how long he had left to live, Arthas was already the next king of Lordaeron. The guards hesitated. This hesitation destroyed Tarina's last hope. Tarina's, who was held by the neck by his precious son, trembled and asked, "What is this?" "My son, what are you doing?" "Inheriting your throne, my father." After saying that, he raised his sword, and the infamous Frostmourne pierced through the chest of the leader of the alliance, the king of the largest kingdom in the alliance for more than 30 years. The blood of the Menethil royal family flowed on the icy blade, and an evil hum echoed throughout the throne hall. At this moment, the millions of souls that died on Frostmourne let out the most tragic wails, and the will of the dreadlords attached to the sword was activated. Across the endless space, almost every dreadlord saw the scene of Arthas killing his own father. The dreadlords laughed maniacally. They were cheering the fall of a saint. They were laughing at the extreme ugliness of justice when it was twisted. This day was the victory of evil. This was the beginning of the Burning Legion's conquest of Azeroth. Their laughter, as well as that of the Lich King Nazul, echoed in the throne hall that had suddenly become dark because of the dark aura. The Death Knight Arthas did not notice, and his desolate voice echoed throughout the entire city. This kingdom is going to be destroyed. From the ruins, a new ruling order will be born. It will shake the foundations of everything in this world. Following the prince's declaration, all the magic circles in Lordaeron automatically activated, and powerful undying from Northrend poured out. Chapter 7:18. The ancient city of Rotterdam had been plunged into war for the second time ever since it was built. However, this time, Xueqi did not lead the army to rescue them. Due to the suppression of the Orc uprising a while ago, Rotterdam had sent almost all its combat troops. And because of the conflict between Uther and Arthas, the Silver Hand was also sent to Andoril, which was hundreds of kilometers away. The rest were all third-rate troops, and they were ambushed by their own people. The people of Rotterdam were stunned. In an instant, the bright sunshine above the city disappeared. The sudden cold clouds shrouded the entire city, and people were shocked to find that the world had suddenly turned from hot summer to cold winter. There were only clouds, with an evil aura left in the sky. The cold wind howled, and the atmosphere was lifeless. The pure white city wall was covered in a thick layer of ice at a speed visible to the naked eye. The enthusiastic scene of celebrating the triumphant return of His Royal Highness had long since disappeared. This was because the screams that rose and fell throughout the entire city had caused the people to fall into panic, and the screams were becoming more and more frequent. Ah! Monsters? City guards. Where are the city guards? Mom, I'm so scared. It was a mess everywhere, and the places a little further away from the city were dead. This was not an adjective, because everyone on the city walls and outside the city gates was dead. It was hard to guard against a thief in one's own house. As the only heir of the kingdom, there was nothing to hide from Arthas. In fact, the old king had been holding on to power in recent years, and there were still many things that he had begun to reveal to Arthas. Everything became the best nourishment for this feast of slaughter. The Undying, a terrifying existence from the Northrend icefield. They were fearless, ruthless, and did not need to breathe. They constantly created death, causing all lives to fall into the embrace of the Grim Reaper. Then they would immediately make the people who had just become dead stand up shakily, raise their knives, and slash at their comrades. All of a sudden, they went from the height of summer to a seemingly endless winter. There were undying beings everywhere, and that made the citizens of the Rotterdam Kingdom, who had lived a peaceful and dreamy life for more than 10 years after the Dark Portal, feel as if they had seen the end of the world. What happened next was supposed to happen in history, where the 300,000 soldiers and civilians of Rotterdam City would be slaughtered by Arthas' undying army. Arthas would then use the hundreds of thousands of soldiers to snowball and sweep across the entire northern continent. Just then, something unexpected happened that Arthas didn't expect. At first, he did not pay much attention to it. His Death Knights reported that the humans in the south of the city were resisting fiercely. Resist? So what if he resisted? The 3 largest barracks in Rotterdam City had been successfully attacked by the undead led by his Death Knights. Nearly 100,000 new and old undead soldiers began to charge into the city from the east, north, and west, besieging the living people in the city. But the situation was beyond the imagination of the dead king of the Rotterdam Kingdom. Run! There was a ship in the south. Once we get out of the south gate, we'll be able to live. Those damn monsters are everywhere on the land. Not only were there people shouting with amplification tools, but there were also countless places in the city, such as the landmark clock towers and tall towers, all of which had bright arrows made of flames. All the arrows pointed in a clear direction. South. At this time, a memory that was not too long ago surfaced in the minds of the people of Rotterdam. Evacuation drill. This was a plan that started 3 years after the Dark Portal. It was proposed by the deputy commander of the Alliance at that time, Duke Marcus. At that time Duque said, in view of the fact that the capitals of 3 kingdoms in the Alliance were once breached, causing irreparable losses to the lives and property of the people. In order to avoid possible future dangers, I suggest that each kingdom formulate a special evacuation plan according to the structure of their own capital. In case there really is a need in the future, at least most people can escape. At that time, the kingdoms were busy with post-war reconstruction. Compared to fighting for the land of Alterac and the right to speak in the Alliance military, this resolution that was unanimously passed by the kingdoms was only one of the hundreds of agreements the Alliance had reached over the years. When Duque was in power, he would lobby the kingdoms to hold a drill every summer. In the first 3 or 4 years after Duque disappeared, the kingdoms still held evacuation drills. After a long period of peace, the nobles of the kingdoms also became lazy. In the end, after 10 years, only Stormwind City, the Furnace Fort, and the Eagle Nest Mountain persisted. However, having done it before still left an impression. After the initial panic, the citizens of Rotterdam, especially those who had lived for more than 10 years, suddenly came to a realization. That's right. We did the drill before. Just do it according to the drill. People began to try to recall the contents of the drill. Humans had a herd mentality. When the first person followed the drill and ran towards the south of the city according to the direction indicated by the flaming arrow, more people immediately followed. The citizens were fleeing, but the killing continued. No one thought that the well-trained soldiers could not stop the Scourge army. The armed city guards could not do it either. The gladiators and fighters in the arena could not do it either. The one who stopped the Scourge army was the Marcus Trade Union. Strangely enough, under the leadership of the businessmaster, Alucia Barov, the Marcus Chamber of Commerce had opened a total of 36 branches in Lordaeron, where land was extremely expensive. Their businesses involved more than a dozen fields, but only one was their main business, and that was wine. They collected wheat from the rich land of Rotterdam, brewed it into various kinds of rice wine, and sold it. This was the magical part. After the initial panic, almost all of the shop owners suddenly yelled out, "Boss, boss! What are you panicking for? The monsters are coming, so act according to plan. Don't forget how the trade union trained you." Bottles of liquor were opened, and dry strips of white cloth were quickly stuffed into them. Then, boxes of liquor were pushed to the main roads by the trade union's workers. They waited with the trade union's guards. Whenever he saw an undying charging over, he would immediately light the cloth with a torch and toss the burning wine bottle at them. Bang bang! With a crisp sound, a large area was immediately engulfed in a sea of fire. Fire was the best way to deal with the undead. Under the flames, the advancement of the Scourge army was immediately seriously delayed. The undead, who could not feel pain, were still charging. Under the flames, their skin and muscles were quickly scorched. Ordinary zombies would usually fall after charging for less than 30 meters. Seeing this scene, the city guards of Rotterdam were dumbfounded. That's right. This was the specialty of the Marcus Trade Union. Molotov cocktail. Also known as the indigenous incendiary bomb. Chapter 719. As a transmigrator, the most painful thing was knowing that a tragedy was about to happen, but not being able to stop it. Arthas was a classic example. 10 years ago, this noble prince was still a good young man, a pure and handsome man who believed in the holy light. Who would have thought that one day, he would turn into a trap? He turned from a great holy knight to a death knight, and even stabbed his father in the back. Before Arthas officially turned against him, Xueqi could not tell the world. Yo! It was obvious that Arthas had a rebellious streak in the back of his head. Terenas, you should kill your only son as soon as possible and get a younger queen to give birth to an heir. In order to prevent Arthas from turning from a loyal subject to a traitor, Xueqi had made a lot of preparations. Unfortunately, because Karazhan was accidentally blown up, Xueqi, who thought he still had a lot of time, could not proceed to the next stage of preparations. Fortunately, the foreshadowing was still laid. The Molotov cocktail, incendiary bombs that were extremely famous during World War II on Earth were placed in the main commercial areas of Rotterdam in advance, legally and grandly. If possible, Xueqi would have arranged for 100,000 holy knights to wait for Arthas to turn against him. Unfortunately, there were no 100,000 holy knights in the world, and Xueqi could not send weapons for battle to Lordaeron in advance. There were weapon shops selling swords to gladiators on the streets, but which weapon shop was not backed by the high nobles of Lordaeron? The fact that Xueqi's Chamber of Commerce could sell alcohol and all kinds of luxury goods in Lordaeron was already the result of Terenas not falling out with them. Who would have thought that the bottles of liquor that were placed on the wine racks every day and watched by countless customers could be used to deal with the Calamity Army as long as they were lit on fire and thrown out with strips of cloth? The people of Lordaeron were stunned. In the end, some courageous city guards threw away their swords and took shields and incendiary bombs to fight the zombies. This bought precious time for the citizens to escape. In the south of the city, something magical happened again. Dozens of huge cylindrical towers were blown up by the dwarves' secretly planted explosives. This was not a tower made of bricks. Although it was crude, it was clearly a huge pipe made of pig iron. Its weight directly crushed the southern city wall. The south side of Lordaeron City was close to Lordaeron Lake, and its city walls were the weakest because the military port and commercial pier were right outside the city. With the protection of the coastal turrets, the southern city wall was the weakest. More than a dozen large pipes that could allow two people to pass through side by side collapsed, revealing an escape route. The citizens could escape from the city through the passageway. At this moment, under the command of the Marcus Merchant Guild's chief steward Makarov, the elite soldiers who were supposed to be the guards of the caravan also rushed over to open up a path for the citizens of Rotterdam City to escape. Makarov shouted, "Push the goods into the lake." Tie all the boxes that can float on the water to the back of the boat and let the citizens carry them. Lake Lord Emir was a super large lake with very developed water transportation, and its geographical location was very important. To the north was Rotterdam City, to the west was the silver pine forest that was being rebuilt, and to the south was the City of Magic, the City of Dalagen. To the southeast, one could pass through the Dalagen and directly reach the fertile Hillsbrad Hills. After 13 years of continuous development since the Dark Portal's second year, the scale of Lordaeron's pier was quite large. Goods from all over the north of Rotterdam were gathered here, transported to the south, and then transported from South Shore to the southern continent. The volume of goods handled was as high as 10,000 tons per day. This was not the modern pier from before Xueqi's transmigration. 10,000 tons was a very shocking number in this era. The docking of the many ships gave the citizens of Rotterdam their last hope to escape. Under the command of Xueqi's chief steward Makarov, the ships would leave as soon as they were full, never stopping. Later on, there was even a ship that set sail with a string of tails tied to the back of the ship. Anything that could carry people, such as floating logs and boxes, they set sail without delay. Unfortunately, as Arthas finally reacted to the situation, the retreat of the citizens became more and more difficult. First, huge spider-like creatures appeared in the south of the city. These were cave demons, creatures that had the genes of both humans and spiders. These cruel demons were once the lords of the ancient spider kingdom of No-Scent, Ejonirab. When they spat out small spiders at the warriors who threw the Molotov cocktails, the line of defense that protected the citizens began to crumble. The fist-sized black spiders descended from the sky. Such long-range attacks were impossible to defend against in the dark of the night. As long as the spiders came into contact with them, the spiders had countless ways to kill a human warrior. The sharp mouthparts could easily bite through thin iron armor. The poisonous thorns would blister on the spot once they pierced into human skin. The poison in the thorns and mouthparts would invade the human nervous system and paralyze a strong human soldier in the shortest amount of time. Without the obstruction of the Molotov cocktails, the stagnant undead army once again surged forward like a raging tide. Makarov wanted to hold on for a while longer, but when he saw the liches appearing on the shore, he let out a long sigh. "We've done our best, let's retreat." Helplessly listening to the desperate cries and wails of the citizens, the merchant fleet began to leave the pier. There was no other choice. If they didn't leave now, none of them would be able to leave. The sailors and survivors on the ship didn't even dare to look back at the pier that had turned into a slaughterhouse. A human tragedy was unfolding there. Arthas was extremely displeased when he heard that more than 50,000 people managed to escape from Lordaeron. "Pass down my order. Get the gargoyles to attack and hunt down these survivors." It was obvious that this was another tragedy. Going back to the present, the area outside of Lordaeron was already in a mess. Because Arthas had brought back a large number of liches, coupled with the cursing sex disciples lurking among the high nobles of Lordaeron, outsiders thought that they had only lost contact with Lordaeron for 3 days. To the players, the Lordaeron army could have avoided being wiped out. In fact, players who looked at things from the perspective of God would never be able to understand the suffering of the Lordaeron army. This was an era where the hierarchy was strict and royal authority reigned supreme. Mobilizing an army without a military order was a capital offense. This was also an era where communication was terrible. After more than 10 years of development, the cost of sending magic messages was still rather high. After all, it would only be reliable if there was at least a sky mage on duty. Furthermore, there was the interference of the elemental waves in the atmosphere. Hence, unless it was an emergency or the level of the magic messenger was rather high, all military orders were not allowed to be sent using magic messages. Xueqi could totally imagine the suffering of the Lordaeron army. He patted Alucia's shoulder and said, "Let's go. Looks like I'm going to be the savior again." Chapter 720. What was a hero? A hero was a very vague definition. You couldn't be a hero just because you wanted to. A truly great hero couldn't be born in peaceful times. Only, save a building from collapse, save the people from disaster. This was a true great hero. After 10 years, Xueqi's face seemed to be fixed at 20 years old. He was young, but had the unique calmness and wisdom in the world. His black eyes seemed to be able to see through the future. They were always so deep and enchanting. Alucia thought back to the past 10 years. She had taken care of the affairs of the Marcus family without a valid reason. She had suffered a lot, Suffered a lot. She had thought of giving up more than once. Every time she thought of her family gaining a new lease on life. Every time she thought of the irreplaceable importance of Xueqi's arrangements. Every time she woke up in the middle of the night, she would think of the incomplete love she had for Xueqi. Alicia managed to hold on. Now that she thought about it, it was really a miracle. Unknowingly. Involuntarily. Inside the carriage, Alicia once again stretched her fair neck and offered her red lips. Woo. Xueqi didn't refuse. He could clearly feel that the two peaks of the Bara family were more important than 10 years ago. If it wasn't for the fact that time didn't allow for romance, Xueqi really wanted to do Alicia right there and then. All right, since the Scarlet Cross is nearby, let's go find Mograine first, Xueqi ordered. It wasn't that Xueqi couldn't directly use magic to find someone, but it was useless. He had to first prove his identity, and then find the person who knew the most about the Lordaeron continent's military intelligence. At this time, a timid female voice sounded. Excuse me, are you Sir Duke Marcus? Xueqi looked out of the carriage window and saw that it was Sally. Xueqi smiled. If you're asking about the former Alliance Deputy Commander Duke Marcus, then you're right. It's me. I'm very sorry. Sally bowed deeply. I misunderstood you just now. As if recalling something, the silver-haired girl bowed once more. Thank you for your help, sir. If not for you, Reynold and I would have died just now. It's fine. I'm the one who's embarrassed. Did I scare you like that? Xueqi smiled bitterly. The young girl recalled Xueqi's naked appearance and immediately blushed. Reynolds, who was at the side, was truly shocked. Who would have thought that a seemingly perverted fellow was actually a great hero of the Alliance who had been missing for 10 years? However, he was not willing to lose just like that. He took a deep breath and said, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but I heard that you wanted to go to the Scarlet Cross. Yes. Xueqi nodded. I can lead the way. Please follow me. To Xueqi's surprise, the Scarlet Cross's encampment was actually less than 2 kilometers away. They would arrive after passing 2 hills. In front of the encampment's gate, which was decorated with red and white flags, Xueqi was not surprised to see a large number of undying corpses. Warriors in red armor were carefully finishing off the corpses. Even on the road, they would occasionally see corpses with only half of their bodies remaining, almost injuring people. Very soon, they were stopped by a patrol squad. Please stop. The encampment of the Scarlet Cross is in front. Please state your purpose. Reynold excitedly went up to them. Reynold. Clearly, the patrol squad leader recognized Reynold. Who are they? He's Sir Duke Marcus. Before Reynold could finish, the squad leader's expression turned cold and he interrupted him on the spot. Are you kidding me? Sir Marcus has been listed as a war dead by the Alliance for more than 7 years. Turning around, the squad leader drew his sword and shouted, Soldiers! On alert! Immediately, there was the sound of swords being unsheathed, and the sword flashed like a forest. Reynold was in a bad mood. He had wanted to show off in front of Sally, but who knew that things would turn out like this? In the carriage, Xueqi frowned. Mograine's army was strict, and it was extremely troublesome to verify their identities. Not to mention that all of his equipment had been destroyed when he teleported back, so there was no way he could have a token. Xueqi took a deep breath. There's no time to waste. Suddenly, a loud voice reverberated throughout the encampment. Alexandros. I know you have strict military discipline, but something big has happened. Tell your men not to stop me. That was a sound amplification spell. Generally, no magician would dare to use it in an encampment. This was because it was the same principle as the Roaring Court in ancient times when Xueqi had transmigrated. But there was no time to waste. There was a commotion in the encampment, and the Scarlet Cross soldiers, who had long been prepared for battle, immediately rushed out. At this moment, another deep voice came from the main tent. Unlike Xueqi's trick, this was a simple, thunderous voice that created a shocking effect. Xueqi? Holy light above, did I see a ghost? Or did I really meet another resurrected one? Soldiers, listen up. Get out of the way, let him in quickly. The first half of the sentence was for Xueqi, and the second half was for the soldiers below to hear. The soldiers were extremely shocked. They had followed Lord Mograine for so many years, But this was the first time they had heard their commander ignore military discipline and shout so intimately. The patrolling soldiers who had stopped Xueqi all had stern expressions. They all stepped aside and saluted at the side of the road. The wooden gate of the encampment suddenly opened, and the new soldiers were shocked to find that the veterans beside them were actually quickly tidying up their appearances. "Sir, this is... Brat, polish your eyes. It's not every year that you get to witness the return of a legendary hero. 10 years had passed, but how many decades did one have in life? The veterans of those years had either died on the battlefield or returned home due to injuries. Most of those who remained in the army had become officers. No veteran who had experienced the Second Battle of the Dark Portal would forget the legendary name of Duke Marcus. Because this name represented victory. This name was full of wisdom. This name symbolized fearlessness. Every officer spontaneously stood beside the gate of the encampment. Not in the current military ranks, but in the ranks of the veterans of the past. The aura of a veteran mixed with the murderous aura of a veteran, but also from the bottom of their hearts. This complicated feeling infected every soldier, and they unconsciously lined up behind their superiors. Looking at the deputy commander of the Alliance, who was wearing a wizard robe and whose face had hardly changed, the veteran's eyes were brimming with tears. A guard of honor shouted, "To the legendary hero, His Excellency Duke Marcus." The next moment, there was a tsunami of shouts. "To His Excellency Marcus." Chapter 721. Xueqi. It's really you? Two burly figures rushed over from the center of the camp. The first one to speak was Mograine. "Hey! Are you a Death Knight in disguise? I heard that the new Death Knight looks like a human." Abendis, who was closer to Xueqi, mocked Xueqi. Xueqi got off his horse and shrugged. "You can try using Holy Light against a Death Knight." Before Xueqi could finish his sentence, he was hit by a Holy Light. Xueqi felt like beating someone up. "Damn you, you really tried." "Sorry for now. Holy Light is the best way to distinguish the living from the dead, as well as those damned cursed disciples." Mograine's expression did not change. Then, in the next second, Mograine's rigid and square face that was filled with the aura of a soldier seemed to have melted like ice. A rare smile appeared on his face. He opened his arms and gave Xueqi a firm bear hug. "Welcome back, Xueqi." Then, Abendis gave him another bear hug. The cold armor made Xueqi's chest hurt, but Xueqi's heart was warm. Yes, it had been 10 years, but the mark he had left behind had not completely disappeared. This was what he was most proud of. At this time, Mograine was shocked to see the two timid figures beside Xueqi. "Renaud! What are you doing in Sir Marcus' convoy?" "Father, The sharp-eyed old Mograine saw the battle marks on Renaud's body and immediately became angry. "I told you not to run out at a time like this. See, you've caused trouble for Sir Marcus, haven't you?" "No, I just..." Sally hurriedly defended Renaud. "Sir Mograine, it's my fault. I heard that an old granny is sick. I ran out of the barracks to treat the old granny without permission, but who knew that I would run into Sir Marcus?" I ran into Sir Marcus." The words of the two juniors sounded like a bunch of lies. Old Mograine grew angrier as he listened. He was about to explode when Xueqi stopped him. "I'm sorry, Alexandros. I destroyed all my equipment and clothes when I teleported here. It was your son and Miss Sally who helped me a lot." Old Mograine and Abendis' expressions turned strange. "Wait, isn't this naked?" Generally speaking, this was a very shameful thing. Unfortunately, Xueqi did not have this awareness at all. Never heard of it. A gentleman shows his balls, while a villain hides his penis. It couldn't be helped that he would drop his equipment and clothes during super long-distance teleportation. Xueqi shrugged. "Yeah, even this mage robe was given to me by Alucia." Obviously, this was a set of clothes in Xueqi's size. Old Mograine had a headache. Why was there so much information when Xueqi came back? In fact, Xueqi also had a lot of information. He did not expect that the boy and girl just now were also very famous. That's right, among the players, they had a very famous nickname, the Bloody Dog Couple. It was not that they were the kind of dog couple that defiled public morals. It was purely because they were bosses in a dungeon, and the players had gotten too much equipment for them. Somehow, they had become a dog couple. However, in the original history, Renaud Maugraine was another example of someone who sold out. As for the girl named Sally, needless to say, she was definitely Sally Metwain, who was known as the White Legs. She was also a female character who was full of sadness but also extremely popular. Throughout the history of Azeroth, Sally had spent most of her time in the Scarlet Crusade, a fanatical anti-Scourge army organization. However, in the end, when Bolvar for Dragon became the third Lich King and stood on the side of Azeroth, Sally became one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse as a Death Knight and became the main force against the Burning Legion. Sigh. White Legs. It was a pity that she became a madwoman and then a Death Knight. Duque shook his head to get these thoughts out of his head. Alessandro, I'm a little late. Fortunately, it's not too late. Tell me the situation first. I need all the information. Old Maugraine immediately welcomed Duque and Alusia into the big tent anxiously. After asking about the situation of Theon and a few other old friends, Maugraine quickly got to the main point. We're here to fight the orcs. The information we received was that there were more than 3,000 orcs preparing to cross the Alterac Mountains and attack Goldenhold Castle. However, we suddenly lost contact with Lordaeron. Thinking back to Prince Arthur's victory ceremony 3 days ago, we were afraid that the demons had attacked Lordaeron. Abendis added, to make matters worse, not only could the portal to Lordaeron not be opened, but we also lost contact with the messengers and Griffin Knights we sent back. Then, a lot of undead suddenly appeared near the camp. Worst of all, they were originally residents of Tarren Mill and the nearby area. Maugraine gritted his teeth. If it wasn't for your sudden return, we would have been preparing to return to Lordaeron. Going back to die? Duque's plain words caused the temperature in the big tent to drop by 10 degrees. Maugraine, Abendis, and more than 15 high-ranking officers' facial muscles stiffened. I received news that the entire Northrend expedition was a scam made by the demons. Arthas and his army were all wiped out. Everyone was shocked by Duque's words. Impossible. Maugraine, the most loyal of the Menethil royal family, staggered and almost lost his balance. Duque, everyone in the North Stream port saw the prince's victory. This kind of thing. Abendis still had a sliver of hope. He hoped that this was just a bad joke. Duque shook his head. Arthas and his soldiers have returned, in the form of a Death Knight. He suddenly recalled his subordinate's report, which stated that most of Arthas' troops had been wearing hoods. Although they had claimed that they had suffered frostbite to their faces in the Northlands, and some of them had even suffered frostbite to the ears and had no choice but to cut them off, how could it be possible that thousands of people had suffered frostbite? Maugraine suddenly felt the world spin. He suddenly felt like the whole world was collapsing. For a great minister who had served the Menethil royal family for generations, this news was too cruel. The only heir to the kingdom had become a Death Knight? He stared at Duque, hoping to see any signs of lying. Unfortunately, he was destined to be disappointed. Do you remember the emergency evacuation drill I announced before? If I'm not wrong, we will soon find survivors near Lake Lordaeron. Maugraine's body shook violently, but he finally stood up straight. Duque, what's the worst possibility? Duque's words were like knives. Arthas will turn 3 million Lordaeron people into undead, and then sweep through the entire Lordaeron continent. Chapter 722. After Duque said this, all the generals trembled. Duque was by no means an alarmist. The Third War of the Dark Portal was the most destroyed kingdom since the establishment of the Alliance. According to the original history, Lordaeron, Dalagen, and Cuel Salis were all trampled by the Death Knights and destroyed. And Stromgard, which had also left the Alliance a few years ago, although Rapid Hold did not really fall this time, it was also greatly damaged, which directly led to the fragmentation of the entire kingdom. After the Third War, including Alterac, which had long been in decline, humans would officially go from 7 kingdoms to 3 pitiful kingdoms. Even if the Dalagen restored their kingdom later, the entire northern Lordaeron continent would be completely destroyed in the Eastern Kingdom. Having seen the power of the Plague of the Scourge, and seeing the soldiers who had just died, or even just bitten, and turned into zombies if they were not treated properly, Maugraine and the others did not doubt the authenticity of what Duque said. The only good thing was that the Holy Light could effectively deal with the undead and treat the wounds of the undead. However, Maugraine and Abendis were more concerned about the future of Lordaeron. What will happen to His Majesty Menethil? Duque could not bear to tell the truth about Maugraine's question. The cruelest thing in the world was killing one's own flesh and blood. Knowing that the first thing Arthas would do after returning was to stab Terenas in the heart, Xueqi still said slightly tactfully, "It's very dangerous." For a loyal minister like Mograine, this was tantamount to a collapse of faith. The modern people on Earth could not understand the ancient servants, slaves, and so on, who would sacrifice themselves for the family. In fact, when a family served another family for 10 or 20 generations, that kind of unconditional obedience would be branded in the bones, engraved in the deepest part of the soul, and had become a part of the body instinct. Looking at Mograine and Abendis's pale faces, Xueqi could not bear to add to the pain. However, Xueqi not adding to the pain did not mean that the cruel truth did not add to the pain. Just when the big tent was silent, there was a sudden commotion outside the big tent. "Report! Our men have rescued the captain of Lord Darren's guards, Lord Melov." Mograine suddenly came to his senses and shouted, "Quick! Please come in." Melov was brought in on a stretcher. He was in very bad shape. His right arm was broken and was tied tightly with a belt as a tourniquet. There were 7 horrifying wounds on his chest and abdomen that were so deep that bones could be seen. The wounds that had been sprinkled with a large amount of hemostatic powder were full of blood and dirt, and there was a lingering dark aura. From the looks of it, he only had 1 breath left. Even the guard captain of the Wang clan was like this. The hearts of the generals in the tent sank to the bottom. "Lord Molev, what the hell happened?" Molev's eyes turned red as he struggled to shout. "Arthas has become a death knight. He killed his father, His Majesty Menethil. Rotterdam is finished." In the midst of the intermittent conversation, Molev managed to reconstruct the entire incident. All of a sudden, every general of the Rotterdam kingdom in the tent lost control of their emotions. Some wailed loudly. Some swore revenge. Some were in so much pain that they wished they were dead. However, Alexandros Mograine just sat quietly on the main seat without saying a word. It was as if his soul had been sucked out, and he was as still as a stone statue. Xueqi and Elugia just stood there, not saying a word. They were not from Rotterdam, but now was the time for them to vent their emotions. After a long time, everyone's emotions started to calm down. What replaced it was a burning desire for revenge. Killing their father. The world could not tolerate it. This was a violation of all morals and conscience. This was a declaration of war against human nature and emotions. Perhaps the fact that Arthas had been tempted by a demon was something to be lamented about. However, that, again, like, what? Mograine looked at the generals of the Blood Cross army who were clenching their fists and trembling as they walked to the military sand table. He almost ordered the entire army to move to Rotterdam City and take revenge on Arthas at all costs. However, they were shocked to see Xueqi walk up and press down on the back of Mograine's hand. "What are you doing?" Xueqi said in a low voice. "I'm stopping you from taking tens of thousands of elites to do stupid things." "What a joke. I didn't come back after so much trouble just to watch you die and watch you idiots send your elites to Arthas. Rotterdam is done for. Since the royal bloodline of Rotterdam has been severed, from today onwards, the Blood Cross will no longer listen to the alliance. We will complete our revenge in our own way." Mograine said resolutely. "Xueqi, don't stop us. At least we'll still be friends." Abendis immediately echoed. Xueqi almost fainted. He knew that these two were brave men, and that they were not so stubborn. They would not have been tricked into forming the craziest organization to fight against the Scourge army, but Xueqi was speechless at their foolishness. Just thinking about it made him feel sad. After the 3 wars in history, almost all of the 5 Silver Saints had fallen. Only Tyrion Fordring, nicknamed Empress Dowager, was left. Seeing Mograine grab the badge of the Alliance on his armor, as if he wanted to officially announce his departure from the Alliance, Xueqi felt a headache coming on. Damn it, he could definitely mobilize the army from Stormwind. But the northern and southern continents were so far apart, and the mobilization for war had not begun yet. By the time the troops arrived, it would be at least half a month. By the time all the soldiers and equipment arrived, it would be too late. If the Blood Cross, the most capable and largest army in the entire Rotterdam, went to seek death, the situation in the northern continent would be beyond redemption. In this oppressive atmosphere that almost froze the air, a flash of inspiration suddenly flashed through Duke's mind. Xueqi suddenly turned around and looked at Elugia beside him. Vanessa's team. Elugia suddenly came to a realization as well. They're in the East Elven Forest right now. Originally, Xueqi had wanted to protect this secret until the end of time, so that the pure and beautiful woman could live a carefree life. But things did not go as he wished. Sorry. Xueqi took a deep breath and threw out a shocking bomb. Wait. Mograine, Abendis, you swore to protect the royal family of Menethil, right? Yes. Of course, that doesn't include that filthy undying monster who killed his own father. Mograine's eyes were bloodshot. All right then. What I wanted to say is that the bloodline of the Menethil royal family has not been severed. Chapter 723. Xueqi, don't talk nonsense. Mograine, who was born into a noble family, instinctively thought of things in a bad direction. The nobles were very particular about bloodlines and bloodlines. Unless it was absolutely necessary, they would not be recognized by the nobles. The Arthi bloodline had been around for more than 2,800 years, and the nobles were more or less related to each other by blood. Even though the distance was negligible most of the time, they were still relatives. So when a distant relative came to inherit the throne, the only thing the nobles could think of was that the king of another country was about to peacefully usurp the throne. If King Tarinas had just passed away, and Xueqi found a random person to come over and claim the throne, that would be the greatest insult to Mograine and the other loyal subjects. Xueqi did not want to say it, but if he did not play this card, he would not be able to stop the decline of the alliance. Why was the alliance often forced to ally with the Horde to fight against the Burning Legion? Firstly, the Burning Legion was too strong, and they had to find allies. Even if they knew that the Horde was not that reliable in many ways, it was still 10,000 times better than the alliance in despair and fighting alone. Secondly, it was also because the alliance was much weaker than it was in the beginning. Not only had a few kingdoms been destroyed, but the most important thing was that the population had been greatly reduced. If the alliance could deal with the Burning Legion alone, there would be nothing for the Horde to do. Xueqi held his forehead, then sighed deeply and added, "It was Princess Kalia." The day of triumph 13 years ago was a glorious day for the alliance, because on that day, the alliance and the four dragon aspects worked together to kill the evil dragon Deathwing, which had been the scourge of Azeroth for 10,000 years. It was also a sad day for Lordaeron, because on that day, the beautiful and holy Princess Kalia of Lordaeron, who was like an angel in everyone's heart, had passed away. Countless people of Lordaeron were saddened by this. Suddenly, they heard that Princess Kalia was still alive. This time, not only Mograine and the other generals, even the heavily injured Molev, cried out in shock. "Impossible!" the two generals shouted. "I saw it with my own eyes." Molev also struggled and shouted. Then, just a second later, the three of them shouted at the same time, "It was you, Xueqi?" Coincidentally, the person who was here right now was one of the witnesses who had participated in the meeting in the throne room on the day of triumph. "I clearly remember that when I was covering His Majesty's retreat, it was you, Xueqi, who saved Her Highness." Mograine was the first to speak. "Xueqi, you bastard! Did you switch?" Abendis continued to imagine. "Impossible. I saw Her Highness Kalia with my own eyes." Molev screamed. "Don't forget, this guy is the most powerful illusionist in the world." Mograine gritted his teeth. Indeed, Xueqi has shown his talent in illusion more than once. Molev's words pushed Xueqi to the top of the waves. "Wait. Then why was Your Highness's dress on that corpse? We can't be mistaken." "Hee. A dress." Her Highness was wearing the dress that she had used to go on a blind date with the so-called Lord of Presto. How did it end up on a substitute's body? If Princess Kalia was really still alive like Xueqi said, then there were only two possibilities. One was that Xueqi was a beast. Back then, Xueqi had kidnapped the princess and stripped her clothes. Based on Xueqi's status, identity, and character, this possibility was very low. Then it should be the second possibility. Xueqi was worse than a beast. Xueqi had long captured the princess' body and mind, and the princess had taken off her white dress and given it to Xueqi. Xueqi felt even more wrong than Do-Yi in the face of the suspicious gazes around him. He wanted to see where the Yellow River was and whether he should jump in and wash himself. "I'm innocent. I'm a righteous person. I really didn't do anything to Kalia." Xueqi was speechless. Not only did the others look at him like this, even Alucia, who was beside him, was smirking. Xueqi was seriously considering whether to dig a hole or teleport away. At this time, Mograine walked in front of Xueqi and placed his two bear-like hands on Xueqi's shoulders. If you weren't the Duke Marcus who refused to be a king and was regarded as a hero by the Alliance and a saint by millions of people, I would definitely pull out my sword and kill you right now. Mograine was right. This was too much of a coincidence. The prince of the largest kingdom in the Alliance, Lord Darren, had turned into a death knight and stabbed his father to death. Over here, Xueqi had made the only legitimate heir appear. If it was someone else doing this, it would definitely be seen as the biggest political conspiracy since the founding of the Seven Kingdoms. However, Xueqi was full of righteousness. His holy name and achievements were too dazzling. Even Xueqi himself did not believe in his own moral integrity, but everyone did. Mograine changed the topic naturally. I believe that no one in Lord Darren will care about your motives and goals for harboring the princess. As long as you show us proof that the princess is still alive, you will be the greatest benefactor of the Lord Darren people. It was not just Mograine. Everyone else nodded in unison. Princess Kalia was still alive. This was too important. The bloodline of the Menethil royal family, which had ruled this land for 2,800 years, had not been severed. This was definitely the greatest comfort in the hearts of the Lord Darren officials. Princess Kalia would become a flag that would lead the people of Lord Darren, who had almost stepped into the endless abyss, to stand up again. At this time, Xueqi turned his head and nodded at Elucia, who was beside him. Elucia immediately began to cast a spell. Do not underestimate Elucia. In the 10 years that Xueqi was not around, Elucia had already displayed the boss-level talent that she should have in history and advanced to a radiant moon mage. Opening a teleportation portal or something was not a problem. Watching Elucia's graceful figure disappear into the teleportation portal, Xueqi did not move. Before seeing Kalia, he was a hostage. Although Mograine was familiar with him, he would not be careless in such an important matter. The generals of Lord Darren were not disappointed. In just a short 3 minutes, a beautiful and noble white-robed priest stepped through the teleportation portal and appeared in front of them. Your Highness Kalia. For a moment, Mograine, Abendis, and Molev could not control their emotions at all. In an instant, they let tears flow down their faces. Her face had changed slightly, but she still had the familiar temperament. The graceful woman in front of them seemed to have walked out of a dust-covered memory. Kalia had matured and become capable. The holy aura around her was many times denser. However, after 13 long years, the generals who had seen Princess Kalia back then still recognized her at a glance. Chapter 724. The generals of Lord Darren were extremely excited. Clattering sounds of armor colliding could be heard. They all knelt on one knee and placed their right hands on their left breastplates. With Grand Duke Alexandros Mograine as the leader, they shouted in unison, Your Majesty, Queen Kalia Menethil. Kalia was extremely shocked. Too many major events had occurred today, and it had long since caused her to be extremely shocked and thrown into disorder. Originally, she and her adventurer team had returned to Marcus City. It used to be the East Valley Sawmill, but was now upgraded to become the main city of Duke Marcus territory. Suddenly, Miss Elucia, who had been taking care of her for the past 10 years and letting her live a happy and exciting life of adventure, returned. She suddenly told her about the change in Lord Darren. Even though she had not seen her father for many years, she still missed him immensely. Furthermore, the one who killed him was her favorite brother, Arthas, who had now become a death knight. This bolt from the blue almost caused Kalia to have a mental breakdown. Losing 2 loved ones in a day was bad enough, but it was her brother who killed her father? Not fainting on the spot was already the result of years of adventuring. The only good news was that Xueqi, whom she trusted the most, had finally returned from the void. Xueqi is back? He's looking for me? Yes. Xueqi needs you. Now. Go now. Lord Darren needs you to take charge. Kalia only heard half of Elucia's words, and vaguely did not notice the rest of the content. She only heard the words, Xueqi needs you. It was this sentence that made her temporarily forget her grief and stop thinking. She followed Elucia through the portal like a moth flying into a flame. When she arrived, she saw the familiar faces of Mograine, Abendis, Molev, and the others. When she heard a large group of generals call her Your Majesty at the same time, she realized that things had gotten out of hand. Queen? Me? Kalia was still a little confused. She pointed at her face with a trembling index finger. Yes. The traitor Arthas is evil and fallen. No one in the Rotterdam kingdom would be willing to serve this patricide and rebel as their king. For the future of Rotterdam, Your Majesty Kalia, please inherit the throne now and lead us to fight the evil forces to the death. Mograine's words were sonorous and forceful. Kalia began to digest these words, but she still could not accept the fact that she, who had been a free spirit just a moment ago, was suddenly going back to be a queen. At this moment, a scene that almost made Mograine and the others faint happened. When Kalia was out of her wits, she actually threw herself into Duque's arms. Duque. Yes. Duque. 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 After a few calls, Duque could only smile bitterly and caress Kalia's beautiful blonde hair. I'm here, I'm back. Duque, they want me to be their queen. What should I do? Kalia was no longer shouting, but directly screaming. Mograine and Abendis were not just dizzy, they were about to vomit blood. It wasn't easy for these loyal subjects to find someone to be loyal to. Now, Princess Kalia even had to ask Duke about something as obvious as whether or not she wanted to be queen. What kind of magic potion did Duque give Kalia, or was she brainwashed? Or had their queen already been tamed by Duque? On the other side, Duque was embarrassed too. In all honesty, I really didn't do anything to Kalia. Duque was embarrassed. He comforted Kalia while saying, please, you're already an adult. After 13 years of training, aren't you already able to take charge of things on your own? Speaking of which, I haven't seen you for 10 years, I don't understand you at all. Even if you want me to give you an idea, I don't know how to help you. No. Kalia suddenly looked up with a resolute expression. If it weren't for you, Father would definitely treat me as the shame of Rotterdam and imprison me deep in the palace. 13 years later, even if I don't die, I'll be a depressed and miserable woman. I won't live such a happy and free life. Duque was speechless. Mograine and the other onlookers were speechless. Princess Kalia's words made so much sense that everyone was speechless. Kalia took a deep breath. Duque, you're the one who gave me freedom and happiness. You're the one who gave my soul new life. If there's anyone in this world who's qualified to make me willingly give up my freedom and step into this political cage that I hate, that person can only be you, Mr. Duke Marcus. If Mograine had only vomited blood at the corner of his mouth just now, he would have vomited 3 liters of blood now. Their princess was unwilling to be crowned, and even if she was crowned, she would only be willing to be Duque's puppet. From a political point of view, this was definitely a huge loss for Rotterdam. However, from a personal point of view, Mograine and the others understood why Princess Kalia was like this. How could 10 years of freedom and 10 years of house arrest compare? Duque, I beg you. Mograine gave in, his eyes pleading. Duque, we're begging you too, Abendis said. If Princess Kalia refused to be crowned, then they, the officials, would lose their loyalty. Even if they forced Kalia to be crowned, how could the Rotterdam have any unity? Even if they knew that Duque had a huge influence on Kalia, Mograine and the other generals of Rotterdam could only pinch their noses and accept it. Duque was embarrassed. His scalp was numb. However, this situation did not allow for Duque to delay any longer. He could only say softly, Kalia, this is not for me, nor is it just for the millions of people of Rotterdam. This concerns the future of all humans. If Rotterdam collapses, the evil undead creatures will sweep through the entire continent. Humans, dwarves, gnomes, and elves may all go extinct. Kalia pursed her lips. After a long time she replied, all right, for the people, I will be the queen. Almost as soon as she finished speaking, the entire tent was filled with sighs of relief. Unexpectedly, there was more. But before I take the throne, I still want to know your thoughts. All right. Mograine and the others were about to vomit their souls out. Their gazes were like knives and swords, slashing at Duque's back. These gazes were clearly saying, kid, you're lucky. You can do whatever you want later, but let Her Highness be crowned first. Duque's body stiffened. His scalp was numb, and his back was sweating. In the end, Duque said, yes, I want you to be crowned. Chapter 725. Kalia finally nodded, as light as a feather, but to the people of Rotterdam, it was extremely heavy. The people of Rotterdam were overjoyed. Long live! Long live Her Majesty the Queen! Next, it was Mograine and the other officials who welcomed Kalia to the main seat. There was a small interlude here. Under Kalia's amazing enhanced healing skill, Molev's injuries actually stopped worsening. Perhaps the captain of the Royal Guards of the Rotterdam Kingdom was destined to be a cripple for the rest of his life, but at least he managed to keep his life. And his testimony would definitely further confirm Kalia's identity. Xueqi stood at the outermost area and secretly sighed. For Kalia, it was indeed not good for her to give up her freedom. However, perhaps this was the fate of the royal family. After all, Kalia's life was completely different. The original Kalia, after not being able to marry, was placed under house arrest for more than 10 years, until Arthas killed her father. One could imagine that even if the kind-hearted Kalia was not filled with hatred, she no longer had a good impression of the Rotterdam Kingdom. That was why she had been living in seclusion after escaping from Rotterdam, allowing the remaining forces of the Rotterdam Kingdom to act on their own. Later, when the Calamity Army attacked Azeroth, the middle-aged Kalia once again came out as a commandment priest. Seeing Kalia constantly looking at him even though she was sitting in a high position, Xueqi felt weird. Kalia, are you telling Mograine that I'm the mastermind behind the queen? At this moment, the detestable Elusia whispered. Xueqi, I'll see how you deal with this. The people of Rotterdam will definitely force you to marry Kalia. I wonder what His Majesty Daylin will think of you. Daylin? What does this have to do with Daylin? Xueqi was confused. Elusia said something that scared Xueqi out of his wits. Xueqi, don't you know? You're still Jaina Proudmoore's fiancé. Huh? Xueqi was scared out of his wits. He almost peed his pants on the spot. Almost subconsciously, he stretched out his hands and grasped Elusia's smooth and tender arms. Elusia, you can't say things like that. Didn't my so-called engagement with Jaina end when Jaina turns 20? Elusia smiled like a flower, her smug expression full of slyness. For a moment, Xueqi almost thought that he was facing a fox. That's how it was. But women are very fickle creatures. 10 years after the Alliance officially declared you dead, King Garen Trollbane wished to marry Jaina. Ah. Yes, not long after you disappeared, King Salas was assassinated by the Stone-Fist Ogre, and King Garen succeeded to the throne. Xueqi's eyes sharpened. Damn, it's actually Garen? It was true that Garen Trollbane was a legitimate prince. However, compared to his father the great hero Salas, he was nothing. Compared to Daneth Trollbane, who was a militia captain but was actually Salas's nephew, Garen was the scum of the scum. Others might not know, but how could he hide it from a transmigrator like Xueqi? Many of the strong in Azeroth became stronger and more monstrous as they got older. Due to the war, the average lifespan had dropped to 20 years. A strong human like Salas could live to 60 or 70 years old and still be able to tear an ogre apart with his bare hands. Moreover, Trollbane's name originally meant Troll Slaughterer. If it wasn't for Garen, that bastard, killing his father, how could Salas have died so quickly? Oh, looks like you still have some feelings for your fiancé. Elusia teased. Xueqi's eyelids twitched and he explained, it has nothing to do with Jaina. I just don't like that bastard Garen. I don't like him either. He has caused chaos in Torrential Castle and even the entire Earthy Highlands. Now, the once famous Highland Knights have been abolished. Sigh. To actually kill a powerful person like Salas, this was a disaster for the Alliance. At this time, Elusia changed the topic. Anyway, Jaina refused to remarry. It just so happened that His Majesty Daylin did not want to marry Lord Aaron. In the end, the clever Princess Jaina used you as a cover, and declared that she would not marry anyone but you. She was born a member of the Marcus family, and when she dies, she will be a ghost of the Marcus family. Elusia continued to laugh. Of course, because at that time, Stormwind had a good relationship with Kurtiras. The regent, Lord Lothar, and His Majesty Daylin were happy to see this, so it was decided. Dooku almost spat out a mouthful of blood. If it was accompanied by a funeral march, it could even turn into a musical fountain. Even a million alpacas running through his heart would not have been so painful. If someone said that Jaina loved him deeply, Xueqi would be the first to not believe it. During the 2 years he was training in Karazhan, Xueqi had already made it clear. She could learn from him, but marriage was out of the question. When Jaina was 20 years old, she would get lost. Marrying a cat or a dog had nothing to do with him. Jaina was not the kind of woman who would be happy to take care of her husband and children. Both sides had already discussed it. Why did this happen now? Duque wanted to kill someone. F***CK. If I'm marrying Jaina, I might as well marry Kalia. Duque was a little mad and did not choose his words. The speaker did not mean it, but the listener did. On the other side, Kalia, who was sitting at the head of the table, pricked up her ears. Mograine and the other old generals also turned their heads at the same time. Kalia blushed on the spot, her right index finger seemingly unconsciously playing with the ends of her long hair that hung down from her temples. Of course, the old and shrewd generals of Lordaeron would not be stupid enough to question Duque on the spot, but the seed had already been planted in their hearts. Duque was speechless. Duque waved his hand and pushed all these things aside. All right. Don't waste time. I've given you the reason and righteousness to fight. Now, in the face of this earth-shattering crisis that will engulf the entire Lordaeron continent, is there anyone else who wants to leave the Alliance? No. Unless Her Majesty announces that we are leaving the Alliance, we are still soldiers of the Alliance. Mograine quickly changed his words. Of course, Kalia was a hardcore supporter of Duque. We'll talk about the official ascension ceremony later. Now, in the name of the Queen of Lordaeron, I order you to unconditionally obey the commands of Commander Duke Marcus. Yes, Your Majesty. Mograine and the others kowtowed deeply. Then Mograine turned to Duque and said, His Excellency Anduin Lothar has left the Alliance command for many years. Originally, I should have been the supreme commander of the Alliance, but now, Sir Marcus, you are more suitable than me. All right, leave it to me. In the face of the Calamity Army's full-scale attack, it would be courting death to give orders. Duque took over the command without hesitation. Just then, he suddenly received a new report. The Calamity Army was attacking the Dalajan. You're tuning in to the Xueqi's Martial Arts Saga YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.